Good morning and welcome to the second day of public hearings on Bill 96, organized by the Quebec Community Groups Network. Bonjour et bienvenue à la deuxième journée d'audience publique sur le projet de loi 96 organisé par le Quebec Community Groups Network. The offices of the Quebec Community Groups Network are situated on the traditional territory of the Kahaka, a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst many First Nations, including the Kenyan Kahaka of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, Huron, Wendat, Abenaki, and Anishinaabe. We recognize and respect the Kenyan Kahaka as the traditional custodians of the lands and waters on which we meet today. I'd like to start by introducing my colleagues on the panel. Madam Joan Fraser is a former senator and a former editor of the Montreal Gazette. Madame Eleni Bakopanos was a member of Parliament for more than 15 years and is a tireless advocate for women's rights. Mr. Thomas Ledwell is a former journalist and recently served as a senior manager at the Trudeau Foundation. I'm Marcus Tabachnik, former chairman of the Lester B. Pearson School Board, former president and executive director of the Quebec English School Board Association, and former president of the Canadian School Board Association, and it is my honor to be moderating today's hearings. Le format de ces audiences est simple. Chaque invité disposera d'une période d'environ 15 minutes pour faire ses commentaires et sa présentation. Cela sera suivi d'une période d'échange de 10 à 15 minutes entre le témoin et notre panel. Les présentations peuvent être faites en anglais ou en français, tout comme les questions et réponses qui suivent. I should also point out that viewers are welcome to provide feedback in the chat and to suggest questions for the panelists to ask the presenters. De plus, ces audiences sont enregistrées et seront disponibles en ligne sur le site web de QCGN. Le but de ces audiences est de permettre ce que le gouvernement du Québec a étouffé, c'est-à-dire une discussion libre et ouverte sur les effets potentiels du projet de loi 96. It should be noted that the panel will not be issuing a report or suggesting amendments to the bill at the end of the hearings. QCGN will be noting all comments, and they will decide how best to incorporate the input into their written brief and oral presentation before the National Assembly Committee hearings. Before we begin, we must thank QCGN President Marlene Jennings, the Board of Directors, the Executive Director Sylvia Martin-Laforge and her team for organizing these hearings. Now for our first brief. Robert Libman is a former provincial and municipal politician who has for decades been at the heart of the language debate and a strong advocate for an inclusive Quebec. Robert, la parole est à vous. You're on mute, Robert. Mr. Libman.
There we go.
Good morning.
Good morning, Marcus.
The floor is yours.
OK, merci. Il me fait plaisir de partager avec vous aujourd'hui mes opinions, mes observations sur le projet de loi 96. It's been a long time since I've seen some of you, and it's obviously a pleasure to participate in this very important initiative that the QCGN is organizing. Now, unfortunately, if we hope to have this legislation changed or in an ideal world defeated, questions about an opposition to Bill 96 cannot come from Anglophone community groups alone. And when the QCGN presents its brief, I think it's critical, it's important that something must resonate or click among Francophones above the heads of the legislators who seem to have already made up their minds. I think something that the QCGN presents or says or articulates has to flip a switch and force Francophones to ask questions about the means to the end, or to even doubt whether this legislation really has any value in protecting the French language and culture. Not only is it ineffective in doing so, but detrimental and a recipe for anger, frustration, and further cleavage in Quebec society. Certainly that we've seen growing and festering for the past number of months, certainly since this CAQ government has started their approach to a new language legislation. Now, according to Statistics Canada, Quebec has the highest high school dropout rate in the country among males. In 2018, the Institut du Québec released a 5-year study and found that Quebec's public schools have a lower graduation rate than any other province in Canada. Also found that the quality of French spoken and written among young Francophone Quebecers is very weak. And I think if a government wants to really improve or protect and preserve the French language and culture, these should be the primary areas of focus. And unfortunately, we rarely ever hear of efforts to address this issue or these issues of improving the curriculum, of strengthening teaching of French to native-born Quebecers and Francophones, and the availability of quality instruction for those who are not native-born Francophones who want to improve their French. Instead, we've become hostage to, or this debate has become hostage to the odious approach of the zero-sum game between English and French that does no benefit to either of the linguistic groups in Quebec. And it's an ineffective means to protect the French language and culture, and it's a recipe for division and further marginalization of the Anglophone community. And I think this is a key aspect that I believe the QCGN should hammer away at. Appeal to Francophones to recognize that this bill does not set us along the pathway towards any initiative that will succeed in preserving and protecting or enriching the French language and culture in Quebec and in North America. And Francophones who take pride in their identity should see this bill as a gratuitous insult more than anything else. Whether it's eliminating government services and communications in English, all that does is take away rights from human beings in their own language, but it won't transform them into Francophones or bolster French. Forcing small businesses to adhere to francization, red tape won't transform the language of their day-to-day operations, but it will consume more time and energy, frustration, and costs for many of these struggling businesses. Limiting access to English CJEBs for those who completed their previous schooling in French but want to broaden their horizons can breed resentment and lead to a lesser appreciation for French and hold Francophones back in the global economy and digital age. And of course, encouraging citizens to snitch on businesses, as this law does, or this proposed law does, forcing citizens to snitch on businesses they claim couldn't serve them in French will likely lead to petty accusations and arguments in stores, further deepening resentment and anger with no benefit to the French language. This bill, of course, will take away municipal rights. Bilingual status in many municipalities will be revoked, but will allow them to retain the status only if they adopt a resolution to that effect. And by putting the onus back on the towns to do so, this will provoke acrimony also at the local level, sparking local language skirmishes in municipalities where numbers perhaps have dropped, and language hawks will converge on city council meetings as these debates take place. And that also is very harmful to our society. Improving the quality of French taught in the classroom, attacking the dropout rate in French high schools, making free French lessons available to everyone should really be the primary focus of any initiative of this sort to promote and protect French. A large majority of Quebec Anglophones can now carry on a conversation in French, and this should be the initiative, ensuring that every Quebecer can master the language. That should be the number one focus of any government if its true intentions were to promote and protect the French language and culture. You know, numbers over time will always show a gradual slippage in the number of native Francophone Quebecers as a percentage of the overall population, or the language of French as a mother tongue. But as long as others, or those that don't have French as their mother tongue, learn to speak French, the overall strength of French in the province remains at the same proportion or even increases, as we know. And unfortunately, though, I think many people believe that the real issue at the heart of this, to many outspoken nationalists, those who are driving the debate, those who are driving Bill 96, that to them it's not really about preserving the French language, but preserving the proportion of native-born Francophones. And that's why, regardless of the health of the French language in Quebec, regardless of the fact that more and more Anglophones and members of minority communities are speaking French, they will always point to any demographic slippage and turn their cannons on the English language and the Anglophone minority. And of course, the harmful zero-sum game pressure will continue. I think that has to be the focus. It's not a question of English versus French. It's not a question of improving French by diminishing English. You know, we've all been through these debates for many, many years. And I think it's time that the government really has to address the real issue. If they want to protect the integrity, the quality, the richness of the French language and culture, there are other objectives that they should address. And that primarily is the mastery of French by not only Francophones, but of course of all Quebecers. So just to conclude on that note, I think this bill clearly misses an opportunity to build a better and more united society. Instead, we have the tighter restrictions that will likely accomplish nothing but division and disdain. It's time for Francophones, I think, to look in the mirror and say that Quebec is better than this. It's time for our Francophone compatriots to step up, and they should be playing much more of a role here. I think the QCGN, perhaps over the heads, as I mentioned, of the members of the National Assembly Committee, should try to reach out and appeal to Francophones and touch on some of these aspects that perhaps is too often missing in this zero-sum game approach that we've been witness to for the past, I don't know, decades. If the CGN can make this case, get past the opinion makers, speak directly to Francophones, we can hopefully make an important dent in this debate and in the legislation, obviously. One or two more quick points just to conclude on. The issue of the inscription of Quebec as a nation in the Constitution is an important one, and we've seen the debate play itself out a little bit at the Quebec English, well, the EMSB over the last few days, of course, and the controversy it created. You know, I think many Anglophones recognize the symbolic recognition of Quebec, its distinctiveness, its uniqueness in Canada, and there's no real debating that. But obviously the debate is more than that. The debate is inscription of this collective rights concept, Quebec as a nation within the Constitution, and what impact that will have. Is it an interpretive clause? In cases where issues such as minority language rights or education rights or secularism are brought before the courts, will judges be forced to balance the individual protections in the Charter against this notion of collectivism of Quebec as a nation? And which way will they be forced to tip the balance? That's an important question. And whether or not this will have an impact on Anglophones' rights regarding control of our education system, Section 23 of the Constitution comes into play. The notwithstanding clause, as you all know, can't apply to that section. With Section 23, with Quebec as a nation inscribed in our Constitution, will Section 23 now become gray? Will it now become vulnerable? These are key areas of interpretation and fundamental questions affecting the English community, English school boards, English schooling. And I know you're seeing many constitutional experts over the next few days. I think these are critical questions that have to be looked at. And this is why I think this matter has to be referred to the Supreme Court for their interpretation on how Quebec as a nation in our Constitution will affect the primacy of individual rights as protected by our charters. So that's one thing I'd like to leave out there on the table for you to really digest and boil down with some of the constitutional issues you'll be seeing over the next few days. And then lastly, one last point is the issue of our community's representation. I think as we all know, we've seen over the past number of months, if not a few years, how our community are political orphans these days. The federal election campaign is making it very clear how alone we are, how quickly leaders are, even at the federal level, ready to throw the Anglophone community under the bus for political expediency, to curry favor with Quebec nationalism. And I think finding some type of political vehicle for our community to be able to express our opinion is something that is of value and perhaps should form the basis of some discussion and reflection at this QCGN as well, more of a political vehicle, finding the right opportunity for Anglophones to express themselves. You know, I can't remember having been more marginalized as a community since when I got thrust into politics in the 1980s, when I felt at the time that our community really had no voice. You may recall in the 1980s, Ivor Fortier, who was the official languages commissioner of Canada at the time, had made some comments about how Bill 101 humbles our Anglophone community. And there was a unanimous censure in the National Assembly where every single M&A got up to censure our Bill with 14, including our Anglophone M&As. And that forced me or compelled me to create a political party in 1989 that ran candidates, not so much to win, but just to send a message our community exists. And I think we have to find some type of vehicle that gives us independent political voice to do so once again, because right now there is no one standing up for our concerns on the floor of the National Assembly. And I'm very concerned that if we don't make an impact at these hearings, that this bill will be adopted unanimously, including support from all the opposition parties, including the Liberal Party. So those are some areas of concern that I have, and hopefully food for thought for the QCGN. And just to summarize, if we can somehow make an impact at these hearings and resonate with some francophones about whether or not this approach to protecting and enriching the French language and culture in Quebec and in North America is the wrong approach and a detrimental approach to all of Quebec society, then perhaps our objective has been fulfilled. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Thought-provoking as always. We have a couple of questions for you from the panelists. Joan Fraser.
Thank you, Marcus. And
Long
thank
time
you,
no see,
Robert.
Senator Fraser.
It's okay.
Long time no see.
Long time no see, yeah. I think your point about needing to have objections to this bill that resonate among francophones is crucial. But what would such an issue be? Do you think, for example, that the argument about blanket preemptive use of notwithstanding clauses would have resonance among enough francophones?
I don't think that will have the impact. I think it's got to be something that will make them question their own ability to move forward, whether it's their children's ability to compete in the global economy in the digital age, or whether it's the impact on their own lives. I think they have to recognize the fact that their own schools are failing them to some degree. Why isn't the government looking at the education system in French public schools in Quebec as an improvement, as a way to improve and enhance the French language and culture? I don't know. I think the notwithstanding clause, to us, we understand it because it's an incursion on our rights, but I think they have to be impacted by what can affect them. And I think what directly affects them are some of the measures like limiting or capping enrollment in English CEGEPs, and the fact that the approach of the zero-sum game is not really going to the heart of the French language and culture, or improving the French language and culture, which is in their schools and their young people.
Thanks.
Thank you. Eleni Bakopanos.
Thank you, Marcus, and thank you, Robert. My question has to do more with the actual political way of raising awareness. It seems to me that, as you said, that we have no allies, the English-speaking community on the political scene. How do we continue to lobby? Because the QCGN has already started a petition. They've already spoken to a lot of politicians, but both you and I are former politicians. So I'm going to ask you a question that may not be easy to ask. How do we wake up the political class that gets votes from the English-speaking community or the Allophone community and tell them that this is really, it's really a bill that's discriminatory, I'll say it, against the English-speaking community? And they're all lawmakers. They're all intelligent enough to be able to read the legislation. And I won't repeat on the notwithstanding clause, which is something unprecedented. And the fact that, Mr. Legault will in fact, on his own, declare independence, even if he doesn't use that word. So any insights that you want to give the QCGN also in order to reach the political class and have some allies on that side?
Well, whether or not we have some allies who quietly behind the scenes support us. You've got Anglophone liberal MNAs who are supportive and quiet, but they will unfortunately rise up to vote in favor of this legislation when push comes to shove at the end, like they did for the Bonjour High resolutions. And I think the pressure, the heat has to be brought on some of our Anglo MNA representatives who represent who have a large representation of Anglophones in their ridings, to understand that they will have to vote in favor of their constituencies. So Richard French, Herbert Marks, Clifford Lincoln, of course, 33 years ago, resigned on a question of principle. And I think that has to be brought forward again. I think these MNAs have to be put on notice that if they do not publicly and with strength contest certain aspects of this legislation that can have a harmful impact on their constituents, then pressure will be brought to bear on them to resign, to step down. I think that type of political heat has to be ratcheted up because they're not willing to speak for us yet, and they should.
Thank you.
Tom Ledwell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Libman, for your comments this morning. A question, you were evoking your own experience in the late 80s and the formation of the Equality Party in light of political circumstances. Much water has gone under the bridge since then, but in looking at, even better, looking at where we have arrived today and looking specifically through the lens of the bill, could you characterize what is different in this with this bill? How is it objectively different from, say, the late 80s when you were forming a new party in light of changing circumstances?
Well, if you recall back in the 80s, what really gave us momentum was when, despite the ruling of the Supreme Court of Canada on the language of commercial signs, Robert Barrasso, the Liberal leader at the time, invoked the notwithstanding clause to overturn the judgment. And that really set off a rage in the Anglophone community, which you can feel now. There's a lot of disdain. The difference now, 30 years later, is there's a bit more of a sense of resignation where people are tired and fatigued and saying, that's it, it's over. But I've seen that spark lately with Bill 96 that is sort of animating Anglophones again. And you have no idea how often I hear from people that we just have no voice. We have no one representing us at the political level. And that's something that we have to look at. I think that at least, the Equality Party had its issues at the time. We had a couple of caucus MNAs. There was some confusion among confusion. If you recall the shenanigans with Richard Holden and some others back then, I'm sure you remember it well, some of you. And the issue was in the creation of a party itself, when a party that's founded along singular principles, when it tries to develop the policies on other issues, there's room for schism and division. But the value at the time was having unfettered voices on the floor of the National Assembly. So when it came to any issue affecting the community, any unanimous censure, any resolution, we were there. We were there to question the government. We were a daily reminder to Robert Barrasso and others of the presence of our community. And one thing to keep in mind is that when the Equality Party, despite the pros and cons of its evolution, you can't deny the fact that the night that we elected 4 members of the National Assembly, it created a shockwave, specifically through the French media, where the French media for the first time started to ask, well, maybe Bill 178, which was the legislation Barrasso passed at the time, went a little bit too far. And that's what we have to somehow get now. People have to start asking, Franklins have to start asking, does this go too far? Does this really achieve the ends? No one's really denying. There's very few Anglophones would deny or question the fact that we have to protect the French language and culture in this North American Sea of English. But how do we get there? What is the best way to get there? And I think Francophones have to start to question, is Bill 96 really a viable way to get there? And if the QCGN can contribute in that way, putting those questions, at least creating that element of doubt among Francophones, I think you will have done a great service to the community, and hopefully the language legislation could be modified or improved somehow.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Tom. One quick comment from me, and I'd like to respond. This bill has become popular in the French community because, in my opinion, it's being sold on an emotional level. Facts just get in the way sometimes, so let's not have anything to do with facts. How do we reach the emotion of the Francophone side? Because until we touch them in their heart and in their mind, they see this as the future of their community, of their heritage.
Well, I'm not convinced that all Francophones feel that way. And yes, it's an emotional debate for many people. Obviously, the opinion leaders like to stoke those fires. But again, I think if we go to there's a common sense approach too, that the schooling, the quality of French, the way French is taught, the majority language being spoken, or should be spoken by all Quebecers, and how to improve the dissemination of French, or the ability of all Quebecers to learn to speak French, and attacking the dropout rate, the quality of French being taught in French schools. A lot of Francophones will find resonance in that. I think we have to make it clear to Francophones that this diminishing English doesn't improve French. And I think we have to make that case. I'm not convinced, Marcus, that the majority of Francophones are all emotionally invested in this debate. If we appeal to their common sense of how do we best preserve and promote the quality of French in Quebec, I think many will find credibility in some of those arguments I touched on.
Robert, thank you. It brings to an end the time period allotted for you. Always thought-provoking, and we appreciate your presence. Thank you very much, Robert.
Pleasure to see all of you. Again, take care.
Keep well.
Bye-bye.
Le prochain volet de notre programme porte sur l'éducation et les répercussions que le projet de loi 96 pourra avoir sur nos écoles primaires et secondaires anglophones. So first, we're going to hear from the parents. Katherine Korakakis is president of the English Parents Committee Association, EPCA, a coalition of parents' committees of the Quebec's English school boards, which represent nearly 100,000 students in the Anglophone youth sector. Good morning, Katherine, and the floor is yours.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Hear you perfectly.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you for having us here. So I'll start. In response to the call for input, the English Parents Committee Association is here to share our concerns with Bill 96. EPCA is particularly concerned about Bill 96 impacts education in Quebec, the undemocratic nature of the bill, the dividing of Quebec society based on language, and the significant marginalization of diverse communities in the education sector. EPCA represents parent committees of English language public school boards in Quebec. We advocate for all of Quebec's English public school and support bilingual education and associated resources for all. I will now outline our top concerns with the proposed legislation. Bill 96 creates systemic inequities in education. EPCA has concern around how teachers and parents will be able to communicate with each other given the provisions of Bill 96, especially if a French-only policy will be forced upon English educational system. Specifically, it is unclear to EPCA whether important documents regarding a child's education are going to solely be made available in French with no option for English, even in the English education system. We fear this will create barriers for parents to play an active part in their child's education. In turn, this lack of involvement from parents caused by such an unequal system that favors one parent over the other will have drastically negative impacts on our students. This is particularly exasperated for the students who have IEPs and other vulnerable members of our school community. EPCA believes, and it has been proven, that a healthy and inclusive education system requires informed and engaged individuals. Bill 96 appears to remove an individual's ability to make informed decisions based on a lack of communication provided in both official languages. As we know, when governments withhold and create barriers to information, the result is an unequal system that further marginalizes diverse groups in society. Finally, taking into consideration the critical labor shortage facing schools in Quebec, EPCA believes that Bill 96 requirements that government employees, which include teachers, communicate solely in French will further constrict the ability to recruit and retain qualified teachers. This will put a further strain on the English education system and negatively impact all students in English language schools. I will continue. Bill 96 is undemocratic. With only 50 groups invited to appear before the parliamentary committee studying the bill, we are very dissatisfied to see that many English-speaking voices have been excluded from the discussion. A strong democracy requires that governments allow citizens to form part of the debate and listen to all voices in a thoughtful manner as opposed to hastily pushing through harmful legislation that will change Quebec society in a very real and likely detrimental way. Bill 96 contravenes the right to speak official language of choice. EPCA is concerned about how those in the English education system will communicate with other associations and unions. An association such as EPCA, among others, have the right to speak their official language of choice without fear of reprimand. Further, parents of students in the English educational system in Quebec rely on parent volunteers who may themselves only speak English or limited French to advocate for them and their children, a responsibility that EPCA and other parent governmental organizations in the English education system may not be able to action given the provisions in Bill 96. This will further put negative strains and unfair systemic barriers in place for those parents and students. Bill 96 limits educational options. Canada's two official languages are English and French. EPCA is not in agreement that capping the number of years children of foreign workers can attend school in English to only 3 years with no exceptions permitted is necessary or even valid under the Constitution. Bilingual education for all is something we strongly advocate for, regardless of background. It is this diversity that we believe will move Quebec into the future, diversity that cannot be achieved if French is privileged to the detriment of English. In conclusion, EPCA has serious concern about Bill 96's impact on our community and educational system and calls on the Quebec government to meet the needs of all parents and students in Quebec. Canada's Constitution protects the language rights of English-speaking Quebecers, and this must continue. Bilingualism enhances our country's biculturalism and sustains the harmony between diverse language groups, resulting in a stronger, more diverse, and sustainable citizenship. EPCA believes these values that set Canada apart from other nations in a significantly positive manner. EPCA does understand the desire EPCA does understand the desire to protect the use of the French language in Quebec, but we must advocate for a more thoughtful approach. The drastic changes in Bill 96 would create an unequal English education system that will leave many behind, causing lasting damages to our young population and damaging the future of Quebec. EPCA believes that Bill 96 in its current form does more harm than good, and we strongly urge the government to reconsider these sweeping changes. Thank you.
I should probably follow my own advice. We have a question from Eleni Bakopanos. Eleni.
So I'll use another language that we shouldn't be using, Quebec. Tikanis, Katherine, and thank you for being here with us. Thank you for being with us. You actually answered in your presentation a question that had to do with the impact between the communication between the parent and the student in our education system. So we're now going into an area which means that the government will be telling us what language we will speak to our own children. Is there a way of bringing this message clearly to every parent, including, by the way, Francophone parents who may want to speak to their children in both languages because they want to raise children who are bilingual? So what measures do you think EPAC can bring forward to also raise awareness both among the parents of children going to the English language institutions, but also parents who are going to, who want to give instruction in English to their children so their children can be bilingual and be citizens of the world, as you said?
Well, the language of choice is a language of choice. In our family, if we didn't have English as a language, I mean, we're all different cultures. And I'll take my personal family. My husband's German, I'm Greek. Our common language is English. If you take that away, and how are we talking to our children, right? How are we communicating and growing as a family? My son happens to have special needs. It's not that we didn't try for him to learn French. It's just not possible. He has a language disorder. So what happens to him? He has no future. He doesn't have the ability to be successful in life, to look forward to a future. So I think that if we keep in mind that all any parent wants is for their children to be successful, to have a future, to be happy. When you put barriers in place that stop that from them reaching their full potential, I think that that's something that all parents can rally behind. It's not a question of whether or not French needs to be protected, or whether or not French is, there's no question about that. But the question is, what happens to the children who can't? What happens to them? What happens to those families? Do we stop moving forward for the protection of others? I don't understand how that serves anybody's, and how that helps the most vulnerable to just even hope for a future. I don't.
And I have a follow-up question, Marcus. My question was more, how will EPCA be able to lobby other organizations in the Francophone community who are also associations of parents to be able to raise awareness that the Bill 96 impacts their children as well and their children's future?
I think the way you do that is by dialogue. I think that speaking to other parent groups, I think that sharing personal stories like the one that I shared, where there's a face behind a concept, many times we just put numbers in place, we put concepts in place, and we don't realize, or we fail to realize that there's actual people behind anything, right? And I think that that's a way forward, by sharing personal experiences and reaching out to our French colleagues and talking to them about how they would feel if that happened to them. Because if you're sharing your story, nobody can, it's your story. Nobody can dispute that, or your concerns for your child. Nobody can dispute that without getting into debates on other stuff. But I think that that's the way, Ms. Bekopanos, that you address that, and that EPCA has already started to address that.
Thank you, Catherine.
You're welcome.
Question from Joan Fraser.
Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Catherine. This is basically a follow-on from Eleni's question. Does EPCA have any formal or semi-formal relationships with Francophone parent groups? I noticed when Bill 96 was tabled that apart from the constitutional question, one of the very few elements about which there was any debate at all in the French press was the question of access to English cégep. Your parents presumably want their kids to go to cégep. Some of them will choose French cégep, many won't. But I wonder if you see any common ground, and if you have any established relationships upon which to build in this context.
So we have very, very strong relationships with our French counterparts. I'm somebody who leads from a place of cooperation and taking away things that divide us and things that unite us, right? So for me, in my mind, you in any type of situation, you have to find, what unites us. So for our French-speaking counterparts, a very strong relationship, and it's built around wanting our children to succeed and wanting good for our children, period. Taking away, when we don't agree on certain things, we respect each other, but we try to work on what we do agree on. And I think that that served us well, that served EPCA well. We're able to move forward in a much more meaningful way because of that strong relationship with the French parent groups, 100%. Yes.
Well, there's never been a time when it might be more needed than now. Thanks very much.
Yep.
Tom Ledwell.
Thanks very much for your comments, Catherine. there's something I just want to touch on. So we've discussed sort of various angles over time, you know, how this affects workplaces, but you specifically spoke of parent volunteers, which is more of a gray area, or at least not an area that I personally have thought very much about. We know how critical parents are to the running of our public school systems. And in your interpretation, how would this apply in cases where a parent may not be able to communicate fully, let's say, in the French language? Would this become a barrier to entry for parents who would like to volunteer within our schools?
100%. And we see that when, you know, we get government communications all the time, right? They're always released in French first. Whatever the subject, they're always in French first. And we see how we start sharing them as soon as we get them. And we see how our parents, you know, will write us and ask for explanations and not even understanding what their roles and responsibilities are, let's say in the last year with COVID-related questions, right? Which is critical. You want to know and be able to react. So just from, you know, the last year and a half, what we've witnessed and how it just holds parents back, I think that it goes to show how it would even put a further strain on a parent's ability to be an active participant, period. When we look at educational success, it takes 3 pillars for a child to succeed. It takes the teacher, it takes the parent, and it takes the student. One of those 3 not working, it doesn't work. It's been proven, there's countless studies. So this is what we're very concerned about. And if the last year has shown us anything, it is that it's primordial that parents understand what the roles, responsibilities are vis-a-vis their children, period.
I know that you have a strong relationship with the French parent side. Has the Fédération des Comités de Parents taken an official position on Bill 96 that you know of?
No, they have not.
Think there's any chance they will?
I think that, you know, those are conversations that need to happen. I'm not sure, but these are conversations that would need to happen with them. Yeah.
Let me know if other panelists have questions, but I'm wondering what the general parents' feeling overall, not the ones that are involved with the various parent committees, but in general. Do you think that it's possible to mobilize parents to become more active or to be more heard? How are the schools doing in moving parents towards getting involved?
Particularly around Bill 96, the school year just started, right? So parents were preoccupied with other things. I think that that's a very good question. And I think that if we want, you know, most parents don't even know, most citizens don't even know about Bill 96. I mean, they don't. And what I think that we need to do is to reach all our parents at our schools and let them know what this means for their children. A lot of people just believe it's the CJEP bill. That's all they think this is. It's not all it is. That's the thing that got the most media attention, but there's sweeping changes that will really impact parents on so many levels. So I think that that's something that all parent committees need to do, is to inform, and all school boards need to do, inform parents. And EPCA would be happy to put something together to send to the school boards, to send to the parent constituencies, because it's very critical that they understand what's at stake here.
I don't speak for QCGN, but I'm sure they'd be prepared to help EPCA if that was necessary. And there are others in the community who I'm sure could be called on as resources, either to help you prepare things or even to meet with parent groups in various areas around the school. I have another question about possible impact on the relationship of the schools, the parents, with some sponsors, with dealing with local business in their communities. And we've always, even way back when I was involved, we always counted on local merchants, local business, and major business to help support the schools, provide extra funding so that special projects can be undertaken, give the students that bit extra that helps them become more rounded and more complete citizens. Do you think Bill 96 may have an impact on that relationship, on those relationships?
Definitely. And that's the scary part of the bill. Is that there's so many still unknowns of what else, how much more it can impact us. So I definitely think that that could be an impact 100%. I think that what makes our schools unique, one of the things that make our schools unique is parental involvement and how much more involved parents are in the English education system. And that's really has proven to be of success for our students. It's a grid plus, right? We see how it helps with academic success. And that really worries us and how it's going to impact children succeeding in the system 100%. And that's one of the ways that I think that could really put a hindrance.
Yeah. You've touched on the language of communication, but there's a comment on the chat about another from Carolyn Robertson. It says, another concern is the specifications regarding professionals belonging to orders and their language of work in the province. For example, psychologists, occupational therapists, speech language pathologists. We're concerned how this will be applied to those same professionals, but who are employed by English school boards.
Yeah, and in our brief, we talked about how it's the children that are the most vulnerable, the children with the IEPs. I mean, it's not just teachers, it's across the board. This is catastrophic. I mean, it's not, I'm scared. I have a special needs kid. Like, this is not a joke for me. You know, this is not something that I want to live through. And I don't think that any parent in my situation, and there's a lot of us who want to go through this type of situation where, you know, we fear for the future of our children and their ability to get services to better their life. I mean, I can't even believe that I'm even saying these words. I can't even believe it.
I have a great concern with you as well about just the operation of our institutions and the specialized schools and specialized programs out of our hospitals and other clinics that serve special needs students. I know there's a great concern. Do the panelists have any other follow-up questions? If not, Katherine, thank you so much. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Good luck with the parents. And as I said, I'm sure you can reach out to the community and there'll be lots of people prepared to help you.
Thank you.
So next, we continue to hear from school groups, and just want to confirm we're a couple of minutes ahead. So I'm hoping that our next presenters are all online. For more than 70 years, the Quebec Federation of Home and Schools has been promoting the involvement of parents, students, educators, and the community at large in the advancement of learning. It also acts as a voice for parents. And just as an aside, it was actually the first provincial level association that I sat on the board of directors. So I have a historic attachment. This historic Anglophone has a historic attachment to the Home and School Association. With us today are Rosemary Murphy, the newly elected president, Mr. Brian Rock, who's a longtime leader in the organization, and the executive director and a community activist, Carol Meindl, all from the Quebec Federation of Home and School Associations. Go ahead, the floor is yours, Rose and Brian.
Unfortunately, Brian's not here this morning. I'm sorry, his computer just wasn't working. I don't know how to get my, hang on a second. Okay, there we go. Good morning. Is Carol not on?
I see Brian's name on the.
Yeah, but like I said, Brian's computer just busted on him, so he's not, there's Carol, okay. Okay, first of all, I'd like to thank the QCGN for organizing these public meetings, giving us the English speaking community of Quebec the chance to present our views on Bill 96. Thank you also for inviting the Quebec Federation of Home and School Associations to be part of these historic hearings. Carol?
Yes, hello. And I'd like to thank Marcus Tabachnik for giving a little background on who we are. Although the Quebec Federation of Home and School Associations was established in 1944, 77 years ago, the first meeting of a home and school association in the province of Quebec occurred in 1919 at McDonald High School in Saint-Anne-de-Bellevue. We celebrated that 100th anniversary in 2019 at CEGEP John Abbott. The QFHSA was very proud to present the Leslie Ann Bazell Award for Outstanding Volunteer Service to Paul Guérin-Lajoie, the very first Minister of Education in Quebec in 1963. But more recently, Quebec QFHSA has been omnipresent during the last 52 years, providing a voice for parents protesting provincial legislation limiting educational rights. In 1969, we protested Law 63, the act to promote the French language, passed by Premier Jean-Jacques Bertrand of l'Union Nationale. In 1974, we protested Law 22, the Official Languages Act, passed under Premier Robert Bourassa of the Quebec Liberal Party. In 1976, we protested Law 101, the Charter of the French Language, passed under Premier René Lévesque of the Parti Québécois. And now in 2021, the QFHSA joins the fight against Bill 96, an act respecting French, the official and common language of Quebec, under Premier François Legault of the Coalition Avenir Québec. Rose?
Thank you. First and foremost, the Quebec Federation of Home and School supports the Official Languages Act of Canada that recognizes two official languages, English and French, in all the 10 provinces and the 3 territories of Canada. The QFHSA also supports the Government of Canada's role as the protector of the 2 official languages. QFHSA continues to support the principle of symmetrical federalism from sea to sea to sea, and the efforts of all levels of government to promote and protect the French language. The Government of Quebec, Quebec being the only province of Canada with a Francophone majority, must govern with responsible laws that genuinely offer protection for the French language while maintaining the rights of the Anglophone minority within Quebec and that of Francophone minority communities in the rest of Canada. For French services in May 2021, the government of Premier François Legault introduced Bill 96, an act respecting French, the official and common language of Quebec. Although there are many aspects of this piece of legislation that are problematic, the QFHSA can approve the proactive efforts of the provincial government of Quebec to strengthen the usage of the French language by proposing subsections 156.24 and 156.25. I'm not going to read them. They are in our brief for you to have a chance to read them all. And they're proposing these subsections in Bill 96 to introduce free French language instruction services to all Quebecers. QFHSA has advocated for French language instruction in primary and secondary schools since the 1960s. We support the government's program to provide free French language instruction to immigrants and refugees. The QFHSA has been a leading advocate for second language immersion education since its introduction. Promoting the usage of French in our schools has always been seen as a strength and an asset for the education of our youth. We continuously look for ways to improve the quality of French education in English public schools. We trust that our government would do the same and would propose true positive actions that are not punitive in nature. We believe it is indeed time for the Quebec government to offer free language instruction courses for all residents of Quebec who wish to learn the language, regardless of their mother tongue. We would like to see the government provide financial support to our English school boards to maintain their immersion and bilingual programs in the same manner that they support the French school boards, which are now the service centers, des classes d'accueil programs. The goals have always been the same, to promote the use of French in Quebec, but the support has not been equitable. However, we feel that the use of the word common in addition to official language in the title and act respecting French, the official and common language of Quebec, and throughout the proposed Bill 96 legislation is problematic. It is both unnecessary and misleading as it represents institutional bias as to the language spoken by individuals in Quebec. Many community groups in Quebec share a common language other than French or English, be it Italian, Farsi, Mandarin, German, Russian, for example. A common language is an expression of personal identity and should not be imposed by any government. There has still been no clear definition offered by Premier François Legault or Minister of the French Language Simon Joly-Barrette as to who would be considered members of this Quebec nation. Will it be all citizens who live within the borders of the province of Quebec? Will it be all citizens who speak French as a second language, as a first language, as a mother tongue? Will it include immigrants and refugees to Quebec, minority groups who have been in Quebec for more than 200 years, or only the descendants of the original colonists arriving from France? And when will the manifestations of the Quebec nation be apparent if Bill 96 is passed into law? We also wish to discuss about the temporary stays of the foreign students, as EPCA spoke about it earlier. QFHSA wishes to express its dismay at the provisions of Section 84 and 85 as they pertain to foreign students studying in Quebec, be they primary or secondary students. Currently, parents may request and be granted a renewal of the 3 years of their work visa, which would allow their children to continue with schooling in English. But Bill 96 now intends to modify the charter with Section 84, which would basically what's the word I'm looking for? Would basically abolish the child's exemption, which is right now only valid for 3 years, and it would not be allowed to be renewed. So the child would only be allowed to go to school in English for 3 years and then would be asked to go to a French school afterwards. And as EPCA already spoke on that, it is not fair to children, especially with learning disabilities. The QFHSA is aware of the extreme stress students are currently under at the best of times, let alone during a global pandemic. With all the current factors working against foreign students, to limit their education to 3 years only in the language that best suits their needs is counterproductive. For a government to vow to put education first and to invest time and money into the improvement of student success, limiting the period of time foreign students can receive their instruction in English to 3 years and then switching them to the French system if their parents' work contract gets extended, does nothing to improve their environment for success. It would be like throwing them into quicksand. We would strongly recommend that the Quebec government allow renewals of exemption to be permitted to allow students to continue their education in the language in which they have started and thus increase their capacity for success. We call on the Quebec government to withdraw sections 84 and the new 85. Carol?
Regarding language tests to graduate college, in addition to the above that Rose has mentioned, Bill 96 would insert the following amendment, 88.0.12. No diploma of college studies may be issued to a student domiciled in Quebec who does not have the speaking and writing knowledge of French required by the curricula of the Minister of Higher Education, Research, Science, and Technology. To evaluate the knowledge of French, that minister shall impose a uniform examinations whose content is the same for all students having received college instruction given in English or in French. However, a student who has received such instruction in English and been declared eligible to receive instruction in English in accordance to Division 1 is not required to take the examination to be issued the diploma of college studies. Although it is appropriate to not impose a French language competency test on students studying in English CEGEPs who hold an eligibility certificate to do so, it is still of concern to the QFHSA that the Minister of Higher Education, Research, Science, and Technology would withhold rewarding a diploma from a student based on their French language test results. A potential of bias against some students over others by testing language skills too strictly hinders student overall success. Graduating from a CEGEP or a college program should be based on completion of assignments and a thorough understanding of the subject material, not on a language test. To do so only devalues hard work. We strongly recommend that the Government of Quebec withdraw sections 88.0.12 and allow students to earn their diploma and graduate based on their understanding and mastery of the subject matter alone. Rose?
The QFHSA has grave concerns regarding the government's tactics of using closure, le baillon, to pass legislation and silence the opposition's voices. This usage of the notwithstanding clause is seen as abusive, undemocratic in nature, and unnecessary by a government elected with a majority of seats in the National Assembly of Quebec. The normalization and repeated usage of the notwithstanding clause integrated within the Canadian Constitution is particularly problematic when the provincial government uses it to override the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, as well as the Quebec Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms, with the introduction of legislation they know is unconstitutional and violates the charters. Individual and minority rights must not be restricted by any government using the notwithstanding clause in order to promote collective rights. In conclusion, the QFHSA calls on Premier François Legault to fulfill his constitutional duties under the Canadian Constitution and the Official Languages Act of Canada to protect and promote the constitutional minority rights of Anglophones in Quebec and not hinder Francophone minority rights in the rest of Canada. We believe it is possible to respect the French language without diminishing minority language rights in Quebec and in the rest of Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. Are there questions or comments from the panelists?
Marcus?
Yes, Joe.
Thank you both so much. To what extent is it important for the QFHSA to have relationships with Francophone counterparts, if there are Francophone counterparts? And do you have any suggestions for how we can do what Robert Libman suggested earlier, which is reach out to Francophones with the things, with points that will resonate with them? I'm not sure that renewable permits, for example, is something that will resonate a whole lot with Francophones. CEGEPs, maybe. I don't know, but I'd like your thoughts on that particular aspect.
Well, primarily I can say there are no counterparts in the French sector for home and school.
Though we are open to French schools starting a home and school. And we do have one in our system. And we are trying, and we do try to speak to our French counterparts. We have contacts that we speak to. We go through Canadian Home and Schools Federation. We go through them to try to get through the other provinces and find out what is going on in those other provinces. Like, as you know, Nova Scotia just 2 years ago basically abolished all their English school boards, but kept the French school boards intact. And we have been in contact with Nova Scotia a number of times to find out how it's going. We're in contact with Ontario and with New Brunswick. Those are the three other provinces that we speak to on a daily basis. And we do get we do get to know how their French is working in their provinces. And we are there to help out. That as QCGN, also when Mr. Ford decided to reduce or get rid of the financing for the French Cégep or university in Ontario, busloads of English Quebecers went and helped to promote and protest that and help promote their French universities. It would be nice now if our French counterparts, the minorities in the other provinces, came to help us once in a while when the Anglophones request help.
Good luck with that one.
Yeah, I know, Marcus.
I don't know if Thomas or Eleni have any questions. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I will ask one. Thank you, Marcus, and thank you very much for the presentation this morning. Both the EPCA testimony and your own did look at the question of learning disabilities as well as the effect on other marginalized groups. Katherine gave a great representation of her own personal experience. I'm curious if this is a concern that you're hearing from other members, and if you can offer any, enlighten us into just how important this particular point is in the application within schools on a daily basis.
Carol?
Well, I think we can kind of echo what Katherine is saying, but the truth is we really won't know how this legislation, when it trickles down, is really going to affect everything. We can imagine how it may affect things, but and also, as Katherine pointed out, parents right now have got COVID on their mind and getting their kids organized for school, whether or not school is going to stay in class or if it's going to go online. They've just, they're dealing with the federal election. There's going to be a municipal election coming up. And I think Bill 96, as has already been mentioned, kind of resonates as the CEGEP bill. And I think it's not on people's minds. And of course, the French press isn't helping by not highlighting any of the things that are negative. And nobody listens to the English press, because at least not in the French section. So I think we really won't know until it finally really starts to manifest itself. Then we'll feel it.
And when the Liberal government tried to change the school boards in 2018, 2017, 18, the cry on the English side was taxation with no representation. And we thought that our French counterparts would follow up on that with us. And I think they're just learning now what it means to lose school boards, especially when on the English side, 2 school boards, the commissioners allocated funds to buying filters, air filters for their classrooms. And when the school centers tried on the French side, the government stepped in and said no. So I think they finally got the message that the English school board system is a little bit better than their school service center. And maybe they could start yelling and screaming about it. If we get their help on that, we could finally get their help against Bill 96. Maybe they'll see how the Bill 40 leads into 96, which just basically will destroy our civil rights on the English side.
Without a formal opposite number on the French side, how does QFHSA plan to be able to reach out to French parents to get involved or to try to help them to understand what the impact could be on their children as well?
The way that we can do that is through our news letters and our press communiques. That's the one way that we can try to get into their system and try to explain what's happening with Bill 96 and Bill 40. Other than that, it would be through the context of our home schools within our schools. They would be the ones that would have to speak to their neighboring French schools and maybe meet with them somehow and try to make them understand what Bill 96 means and how it can restrict our rights.
You have quite a task on your hands because the French service centers councils don't operate the same way as the school board councils do. They are headed by and run by the director general and by the principal in each school. And you may have quite a task trying to get by either of those without perhaps holding some community events and making sure that the schools are, local French schools are invited, or how you get to them is going to be a challenge. I think that's for sure.
Well, now that the government has opened up sports, that is one way that our parents can communicate, because our children all play hockey together, they all play baseball together, they all play soccer together and football. So that would be one way that our parents can speak to our French counterparts.
I know it's a difficult time with COVID and with the opening of school, but how do you foresee school participation in QFHSA? Do you think you'll have a good, strong membership still in the coming year?
Carol?
Well, we did notice a dip last year because parents are not permitted in the school to volunteer. And that's a big part of the school community, along with gathering by the fence outside the school as kids are going in and out. Parents have an opportunity to talk and network then. But the home and school associations have found that providing services online, having their meetings and fundraisers, has actually increased their parent participation to some extent. So they're holding on, and it's going to be another year where parents are not going to be invited into the school. They're going to have to depend on the good services of the teachers to take on a lot of the tasks the parents might have done, decorating the gym, providing treats for the kids, and that sort of thing. But we're hoping that when the COVID pandemic is over, or at least we've learned to live with it in a very comfortable way, then parents will be allowed back in. They'll get back into being a critical part of the school community, appreciated by the teachers and by the administration. And they'll continue to play a very important role in student success. As Katherine pointed out, the more parents are involved in education, the better the kids do.
Do you foresee Bill 96 impacting the way you communicate with parents and with outside organizations, with some of your sponsors? Are you going to have to communicate solely in French? Are you going to do it bilingually? Are you going to continue to do it in English? Has that type of discussion been had yet?
Well, I know from my own personal experience in communicating with Canadian Heritage office in Montreal, I've always been able to speak in English with them. And they send things back, English and French. That may change. It may have to be only in French. I've also been able to communicate with the Ministry of Education at their offices in English, if necessary. But because our own organization has such a small staff, we can continue to communicate with our member associations in English and produce all of our documentation in English. It's just if we want to have any kind of communication with the Ministry of Education, it will have to be in French.
So we may have to hire a translator if 96 does force us to speak in French or to communicate in French with all organizations.
Yeah.
And has there been any exchange with the Canadian Home and School Federation? How have they or can they be brought in to help?
They are willing and standing by to help. All we have to do is ask.
That's good news.
Yeah.
And I wish you a lot of luck. It's a tough challenge ahead of you, that's for sure. Besides all of the other day-to-day stuff, you now have this on your plate.
Yes.
It's not going to be easy, that's for sure. But there are people who are prepared to help, so don't be shy to ask and to seek out that help.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
we've been attending all the conferences that QCGN has put forth, and we have a lot of those legal papers that were put out. So we're using a lot of those templates, and we'll start getting the ball rolling on our side. And again, thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, we appreciate it. I just one last comment, and it's something that I lived with when I was with on home and school as well. QFHSA is sort of seen as, and pardon this very politically incorrect description, the tea and cookie ladies. And it's not. It's a lot more than that. And I think it's really important that that be part of the message that you get out as well. For 30 years, we tried to convince people that it's more than just setting up the gym and blowing up all the balloons. It's, you know, it has a real political voice too. And its committees reach deep into constitutional issues and into heritage issues of the community. So we wish you luck and thank you both. Send Brian our regards. Wish him well with his computer. I tried to contact him about a week ago about something else, and his computer had crashed then as well. So good luck to him. Thank you. Thank you. Oh,
Thank you.
Thanks again, Marcus, and I'll see you Saturday, Marcus.
yeah, I guess you will.
Sunday, sorry, Sunday, school board elections.
Sunday, yes, you will see me Sunday. I'll be there.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
The next speaker is Christopher Shannon. Christopher Shannon is the head of Lower Canada College, who for many years has led the advocacy committee of the Quebec Association of Independent Schools. In that capacity, he played a key role in the successful court challenge of Bill 104, a challenge that went all the way to the Supreme Court. Good morning, Christopher. C'est à vous la parole.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. My pleasure. So as Marcus said, my name is Christopher Shannon. I'm the head of Lower Canada College, but I'm actually presenting this morning as a member of the executive of the QAIS, which is the Quebec Association of Independent Schools, on behalf of our president, Marnie Stein, who's the co-head of JPPS Bialik. And a number of you may be familiar with the QAIS schools, but the Quebec Association of Independent Schools is 23 schools. As an association, we've existed since 1964. Our schools include a wide variety of schools, single-sex, co-ed, pre-K to grades 12. Many of our schools have been around for over 100 years. And in fact, interestingly, many of our schools are members of FAEP as well, which is the French language independent school sector, because of our commitment to French and to bilingualism. So I would like to begin by just reiterating that indeed we, as a set of schools, as an association of schools, are extraordinarily committed really to the primacy of French in Quebec. We understand this. It is part of the life that we all live here in Quebec. And it is the spirit behind the primacy of French in Quebec that we teach our students to be very, very competent and capable in French. And we do have international students who come to our schools from all over the world who may be starting French from scratch. We have very strong bilingual programs. We've had events in the past where we've promoted the strength of our commitment to French. But indeed, we are, as mandated by the government, part of the English school system. And we contribute to the reality that in this province, il faut parler en français. And so that's very important to us. With Bill 96, like many of the other presenters, we have a serious apprehension. And in particular, because there are some very special apprehensions that are going to be focused on today, we're going to focus on one that's been mentioned already, but it's that renewal of the exemption for temporary access to English language schools. Currently, to come, for example, from, I don't know, Munich, and you have an expertise, you're coming to Quebec and your child has maybe never studied French before, but your child has been perhaps in an international school in English and has capacity in English, it may be in best interest of the child to go to an English school. That exemption from being an immigrant and going not to the French system is guaranteed for 3 years. And it is currently available as a renewal once for another 3 years. So that's a total of 6 years. Our schools often host families like this who are moving temporarily to Quebec. They bring special abilities to our province. They may, the parent and the family, one of the parents, if not both, could be a university professor. They may be a medical specialist in a hospital with very unique expertise, having been recruited by the hospital. They may be coming to a science research facility. They may be in Montreal's growing tech sector. They may be in a private company. They may be in one of the international organizations, which is hosted here in Montreal. They may, in fact, be a clergy member. So all these sectors in society have experts, and Montreal is often an attractive place for them to come. For many of those people, and it has been my experience, these professionals, the ability to know at the outset of their job application or the potential transfer process in an organization they're already within, the ability to stay beyond the 3 years is critical to that decision up front about whether or not they will come to this province. And I think, like every city in the world right now, we face fierce global competition for talent. We feel it's imperative as an association of schools that we are contributing to that notion of offering a welcome mat to the people who are choosing to come to Montreal or to the province of Quebec. And we want them to be able to make Montreal home in a warm and welcoming way, rather than offering them a complex set of hurdles and bureaucratic nightmare or maze that can in fact make it very difficult for families arriving in a new community. So our view is it is not in the interest of Montreal, it is not in the interest of the province of Quebec to limit the work visa to 3 years, and the right to the extension to 6 years, to up to 6 years, has been very critical at the outset for families choosing to come here. Every single student at a QAIS school receives a very strong focus in French education. And as I reiterated, even if they have no background, and we think that unlike other constituencies across North America, it is our mandate to perhaps bring them faster in the acquisition of French than other places from scratch, if that's the situation, or if they have a initial background. We are very proud of our educational expertise and capacity to bring those students forward and for them to understand the spirit and climate of the rich culture, Francophone culture that is here, both in language and in culture in Montreal and across the province. So in summary, as written and as proposed, Bill 96 would create barriers for the welcoming and the attraction of talented professionals considering Quebec as a home. We believe that more people would say no to the opportunity to come here at a time when competition for talent is fierce. And why would we limit the potential to have the best trained, the most capable professionals who would be willing to contribute to Quebec society? Why would we limit them at the very outset? Because indeed, this legislation as written would do that. So we urge the government of Quebec to maintain the system of allowing for some degree of flexibility for the access to English education as it is. That means one renewal. And it is a more balanced approach that we believe that would be in the best interest of all of us in this province. So open to question.
Thank you, Christopher. John Fraser.
I do apologize. 2 questions, if I may. One, are French language independent schools in any way involved in discussions with you on these issues? Second, you said that it's a very, forget your word, but a cumbersome, difficult process to get even the 3-year certificate. How cumbersome? Most of us are Quebecers. We haven't had to apply. What's it like?
Well, if you can put yourself in the place of anybody coming to a new place, it's complicated enough to find a school system, the right match. And I think that parents are always looking for the right match for their child. Language is actually, if their child has capacity in English and is used to being schooled in English, if they're able to continue this, they probably would continue to seek it. And we find that virtually everybody would like the opportunity for their child to learn French if they don't already have it, or to refine their French. There is a lot of paperwork involved in getting these exemptions, and it's really incumbent upon us and our admissions offices in our schools to help. And what we do is we help facilitate this for the family. So it's part of their decision to come to the, let's say, the city of Montreal, and finding housing, finding schools, deciding where is right for their family to live. We've learned that, and I can tell you an example, if I can give you a quick aside. One of the university presidents was only going to come here if the children were appropriately settled in the right education. So we know, and I can give you many other examples, that families are not going to make the decision to bring their children here unless they know their children will feel, at least from the outside looking in, that they will be settled. There is a fair amount of paperwork. We try and make sure that we do it on behalf or in partnership, in concert with the families together, but it's a maze that they find extremely difficult. So we do a lot of the paperwork with them, but and guide them, because they really do need guidance. Because otherwise, coming in almost any other constituency in the world, this doesn't exist. And it's a step that they wouldn't have to go through.
Who gives the exemption? Is it the Education Ministry? The Office de la Langue Française? Who do they actually have to apply to?
It's the ministry. It's the ministry. So there's paperwork that we have to do. There also is a tribunal that makes decisions around exemptions. And we've had some scenarios where we've had to appeal to tribunals, which sometimes, in our experience, are extremely black and white. They read the law in a very black and white terms. I've had many cases where, in my own personal experience, and I'm sure my colleagues in other schools in the QAIS, where we have had to make applications for what we would call humanitarian exemptions, that a child has very particular circumstances in the family, and the wellness and the balance of the child is about being able to continue in that language, and being thrown, let's say in grade 9 or grade 10, into a brand new language would likely be extremely difficult for that child to adapt. And we have seen very different responses from that tribunal. The tribunal often is bureaucrats who simply apply the law in a very black and white way. We have often had to get politicians involved to have them move 1 inch off of what's black and white on paper, and to recognize a truly humanitarian need on the part of a child and a family. But we would like these families to see Quebec in what it can be, and that is a very attractive place to be. And we've had some scenarios where people have had some decisions which have forced them to leave, and we don't think that's in the interest of anybody.
Good morning, Mr. Shannon. Thank you very much for your presentation. I just want to zoom in a little bit on the point that you made about it being a very competitive global marketplace. This seems to me a message that should essentially become something of a rallying cry. And I'll take this from two approaches. One is this a message that some of your French counterparts are recognized, can support you on, whether that be the French language schools? The second being, what has been the response? Why is this message not breaking through, perhaps, with policymakers? My personal feeling is that I think this particular proposal in 96 is not widely understood, and I'm not even sure that our colleagues in the French sector, even in FAEP, are aware that there is this limitation being placed. And it's a limitation when, if somebody were already here for 3 years, why they wouldn't be allowed to stay here for another couple of years or 3 to contribute to Quebec society with their unique abilities. It doesn't harm anybody. So I'm not sure that most of my friends and our friends in the French sector, and certainly in FAEP, the English or the French school sector, are fully aware of this. There certainly could be more work on our part to collaborate with that sector to try and make sure that they're understanding there is a
a proposal to cut off or cut back something which has become a norm. It's become an effective norm for a long time. And I would claim that this is a government which has been very clear that they want to be known as the efficient / business government of Quebec in a competitive 21st century world where indeed we have to abide by the norms of the world. We are, for example, as I mentioned, a tech sector in the city of Montreal. We have quite a vibrant tech economy. And for those who are competing for tech expertise all over the world, they are not putting up barriers. These are people who are really laying out the welcome mat to make this the most attractive place. And I think that the culture of Montreal is dynamic. We should let that stand on its own without putting up walls so that people would say, yes, but there is this problem for me and my family that I can tell you, even university presidents would say no to coming to the university once selected if their child cannot have their feet on the ground and be stable, because no unstable family is, or no sense of a family being unstable is going to be something that's going to actually have somebody say yes to a position in the province. So I think that, again, these numbers would be limited, but at the same time, I think that they're reasonable. And to make this change at this time, I'm not even sure that the Premier of the province is aware that this is in a 100-page legislation proposal, one of the changes that's in there, and understands its impact.
We have a question online and in the chat, and it asks, what has been your experience in mobilizing politicians to advocate for your needs?
It's been interesting that I think that politicians are perhaps not unlike anybody else. When the politicians understand that there may be very powerful forces who would be very displeased with something, and we occasionally mobilize using some of the voices who maybe politicians suddenly hear better than the common citizen. We've brought some of these people to the table. We've been very clear with previous governments, because there have been other restrictions, even under the Liberals. There were restrictions in access to education that were extremely complex, and there was a web. There is existing right now a point system that was introduced by the Liberal government about who can attend an English school. And we have sat with politicians in the Liberal government, and we've actually put a proposal on the table about eliminating a point system that we see to be onerous, complicated, putting too much on the shoulders of families who have no idea what it's about, and really is restrictive rather than welcoming. So that proposal is in the hands of the CAQ government. But the CAQ government, I think, with the pandemic, has had other things on its hands as well, as from a priority point of view, and we have had meetings with them. But I think that it would probably come back as a priority going forward as we go forward with further discussions of 96. That we want to limit legislation, or not even legislation, because the point system, which people have to abide by to access English education, does not require the legislature actually take action. It actually means that the government can take action on its own merit, and limit the imposition of the points in a complicated way, and just make it. We have a proposal that we've sent to the government, and they tend to be open, but we have not had a lot of feedback from this current government on that particular issue. And I think that they're allowing the 96 discussions to go forward in a way that we all understand. But there has been historically, and it's not just under the CAQ government, the Liberal government also introduced this point system on access to English education, which was overly complicated, relatively Byzantine in its complexities, and generally we think that it's actually seen its day and is no longer required. And that was in response to the Bill 104 Supreme Court decision.
How long does it usually take to get a response on an application for a temporary visa?
I would tell you it's gone up and gone down. It used to be within weeks. In the last few years, there were times where it took months, and there would be an application and it would take a couple of months. And we are finding that some of our people who work in our admissions offices can cut through some of the clutter and sometimes get responses, but it really is, it tends to shift. It's been pretty good recently. But as we entered into the COVID period, it really got muddled, because I think a lot of things in life became rather muddled, and people weren't necessarily at work. And when they were working, it was from home. They didn't have access to everything. But it is the connection to these officials is usually through our admissions officers. And so an individual wanting to come here, they find it very difficult to get responses. It tends to take a long time, but our people tend to be a bit more efficient at that.
Another question online, and that's, are there any planned, or have you already had discussions at the federal level pertaining to the language issue and the issues being faced by the schools in helping bring families to Quebec and to Canada?
We have in the past, because we technically are a minority group here in Quebec, and there is funding and support for this. But we haven't at the moment for Bill 96. So at the moment we haven't done that at the federal level, but it's something that I chair a group in the Quebec Association of Independent Schools, which is a government relations committee or an advocacy committee, and that would be something we'd consider doing now.
You mentioned that there's inconsistency when you bring issues to the Tribunal Administratif, and I'm wondering how that process unfolds, how long it takes to get to them, through them, a decision. I have my own experiences with them from the school board time that I was at. And, I think by not commenting, I'm making enough of a comment about my feelings about the TAC, but I'm wondering about how the process works when you approach them.
I would say that it's probably as collegial as it could be right now. I'm not trying to paint a picture of a perfect world. There seems to be a level of collaboration. My concern, however, is that the rights of people are being dealt with by people who, in my view, don't have the authority or shouldn't have the authority. So you're talking about technocrats who are applying black and white rules in what is often a very sensitive situation for the welfare of a young person. I've submitted documentation for continuing education on behalf of a student who's been with us for a long time, who may have a psychologist report saying, taking this away from this child at this time would have severe and lasting consequences. And the technocrat says it's black and white, it's in the law. So sometimes I don't believe they are listening to us. So I think we still have work to do on that front, and that's for sure. And I believe it's our job. And occasionally, I've been at this job for a while, and I've had circumstances where I have not listened to the decision of the tribunal, because I believe that it has been in my responsibility as the head of a school to protect the welfare of a child. And if a technocrat is going to tell me that the child has to leave the school, we sometimes question whether or not that person has the authority, which is greater than myself or the people who are close to that individual, if it in fact would risk their personal or mental health.
Actually, I was just going to lower my hand. You answered the question, but perhaps I could ask another one, which may be a pejorative question. Do you have any relationship with Mr. Skeet, who's the point man on the English for the English community in the CAC government? And if so, has he at all been helpful?
We attempted to meet with him, and he wouldn't meet with us in person. He sent us his political assistant. We met with her. We actually even made we have a group of lawyers in our association who have worked long and hard on how to, on the point system as an example, on how to simplify the point system, which, and not just because of the CAC government or Bill 96, usually these regulations after 5 years should be reviewed. Have they worked? Are they functional? Should they be refined? And at that point, we put together a proposal which actually facilitated a simplification of the point system, which is overly complicated in our view. And we think that in practice, there's evidence of this. We presented it to his assistant. He wouldn't meet with us in person. We asked for a follow-up, and we haven't had one. And we continue to ask for an in-person meeting, and we haven't had an opportunity to have it.
Thank you.
You focused on the entry visa, the temporary permits. Are there other areas of the bill that the association is also focused on?
No, not so much. At this point in time, I think that some of the other groups who are presenting here are, I think, making clear claims about direct implications to their area of expertise or stress in society. And I think we'll leave it to them. And so we've really focused on this particular one, which is threatening to education, but I think it's threatening to the welfare of this province as a dynamic 21st century global competitor. It is a global world, and we have some fantastic families who are coming to us, who are thrilled to be in Montreal, and to add this layer of limitation to them, and in some cases while they're already here, I think would be insulting to them. And the word gets out pretty quickly. I mean, I was interestingly on this proposal, I was contacted in the summer by the New York Times. And the New York Times contacted saying, you know, is it true that the government of Quebec is considering limiting people coming to the province who would be there for 3 years and they just have to up and leave, or send their child to a school system in which they may not have adequate linguistic skills? And I said, yes, unfortunately, that's the case. So as a community, as we're doing today and in the next little while, we're advocating to be reasonable and make sure that people outside of this province who respect linguistic and cultural heritage and would like to contribute to it, feel that if and when they were to come here and bring the expertise that they can offer us, that they feel welcomed in the process.
Well, if there are, Eleni, you have another question? Or your hand's still up, that's okay. In that case, Christopher, thank you so much. It's a very, very enlightening to hear about this. And I think it's important. There are so many aspects that this bill will affect that we can't necessarily all focus on. And we appreciate your input.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on behalf of our association.
Thank you. The next speaker we have is Michael Murray. Mike Murray is the chairman of the Eastern Township School Board, where he has for many years been a strong advocate for ensuring schools respond to the needs of their communities and to remain central to our vitality. Morning, Mike, and welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marcus. I appreciate the opportunity. And I just want to comment in beginning that as the fourth speaker this morning on the topic of education, I may touch on a number of issues that have already been addressed. But I think from the point of view of English school boards, I may bring a somewhat different perspective. Je me considère d'abord un Québécois. J'étais né ici. Mes racines reculent pendant des générations au Québec. J'ai élevé une famille ici, j'ai fait une carrière ici et j'adore le Québec. Je ne me considère pas un anglo-québécois ou n'importe quel autre de double terme. Je suis simplement et entièrement un Québécois. I'm happy to say I'm fortunate to be bilingual. It's enabled me to build a career and have the flexibility and opportunity to do many things that being unilingual would have rendered impossible or very difficult. I've enjoyed many advantages and been proud to hold elective offices voted into office by Quebecers of all linguistic stripes. Bilingualism in both official languages is a marvelous asset. Mastering even more languages would be better still. Bill 96 is a travesty. It's likely to weaken Quebec's slow growth, deprive youth of opportunities to fulfill their dreams, reduce diversity, and limit the richness that comes from broadening understanding. It will, has been mentioned by others, surely drive away some of the most dynamic, creative, and productive individuals, both those who would otherwise come here from elsewhere, and those who, being raised here, will decide to seek to fulfill their dreams and ambitions elsewhere. Freedom to live as one chooses, including the language of using the language one prefers, is surely one of the great values everyone can espouse. To use the pretense of protecting French to restrict the use of English and ultimately to render it invisible is beyond petty. The world offers boundless choices and opportunity for our youth to grasp, and this bill is likely to deprive many Quebecers of one of the key tools, command of English, that can unlock so many opportunities. Education has been demonstrated to be the foundation on which societies build prosperity and wealth. Quebec has a world-class education system, regularly ranking in the top handful of worldwide in terms of student achievement. That includes youth education, colleges, and universities. Bill 96 will handicap our education system by making it less able to provide all the skills students may need to achieve their goals and dreams. Many of the measures of the bill are destructive, as has been touched on by the previous speakers. Sections 84 and 85 that limit the eligibility certificate renewals as an example. But this is a relatively trivial focus. The real concern, as Christopher Shannon pointed out, would be the impact on people choosing to come here. We're talking about people who are not immigrants, have not chosen to spend their life in Quebec, but rather are on temporary visas themselves. That's a matter of 3,000 or 4,000 students in the 100,000 plus student population of English instruction. What we are talking about are the 150,000 temporary workers in Quebec who come from all parts of the world with specialized knowledge and skills, who may be discouraged from coming here. Their skills are in demand worldwide, as Christopher Shannon pointed out, and the competition is ferocious. This is one of the issues, I believe, that we can use to address the self-interest of Quebec in limiting the impacts of this legislation. Bill 96 would also limit access to English CEGEPs by capping enrollments. It's another self-destructive choice. I was, for 7 years, president of the Board of Governors of Champlain Regional College. Our campus in Quebec enjoyed one of the highest academic rankings among colleges of the province, and demand outstripped available spaces by 3 or 4 times. The top students from all over Eastern Quebec vied for admission to study in English, many of them francophones and wishing to prepare for university instruction in English. With that basis, they could go anywhere, and many subsequently studied in top universities in the United States and elsewhere. Being a Quebecer who did my university in Ontario, I probably share with those students a sense of belonging to this unique bilingual society. Many of them surely returned to flourish here rather than stay abroad, but they needed English to be able to do so, a richness Bill 96 wants to do away with. Moreover, limiting French CEGEPs to a maximum of 2% of their enrollment for Anglophones undermines a basic principle of community colleges, where students can study close to home. It will also limit the Anglophones who follow professional programs before going on to swell the ranks of healthcare workers, police and security services, and the civil service at large. We already deplore the underrepresentation of minorities in the public services. Once again, the consequence of this short-sighted policy will reduce diversity, which enriches our society. We have to also question the principle of access to justice. The section eliminating the requirement for judges appointed by Quebec to have knowledge of English will surely reduce access to justice for the English portion of society. These judges preside not only over provincial courts, but over municipal courts, addressing property rights, zoning regulations, and a myriad of impacts on individuals. The right to be heard in English is enshrined in the Canadian Constitution, but of course, with this bill, that right would be overridden. There are sections relating to the language of communication between institutions, but how it would function in practice is very unclear. A school board, for example, and a union are both institutions. How are we intended to communicate between us if we're constrained by such vague generalizations? Surely clarity is one of the essential elements of good legislation. It's alarming to think the way Bill 96 is applied will be left up to individual interpretation as a result of ambiguous phraseology. Again, Christopher Shannon outlined some of the difficulties schools encounter when dealing with bureaucracy and the highly variable way that regulations and laws are interpreted. And ultimately, the declaration that French is the only official language of Quebec is incompatible with Section 133 of the Constitution. can there be any other interpretation that Quebec wishes to extinguish education, English education and English within its boundaries? And we deplore the casual use of the notwithstanding clause. It's further cause for concern. By using the clause preemptively, the government tacitly admits that it's depriving citizens of rights and protections. The guarantees against unwarranted search and seizure are also casually overridden by this bill. We must not permit our rights to be reduced or eliminated so cavalierly. I would, however, endorse the concept that we use our opportunity in this interval of debate and review to appeal to the self-interest of Quebecers. The issue of our high technology sector in Montreal is critical. And if we don't make welcome the kinds of individuals who have the skills that those sectors need, we will lose those sectors, their high-paying jobs, and of course, the tax base that comes with them. I could go on about the many other ways in which this draft law is bad for all Quebec, but I prefer to conclude with the recommendation that this bill be withdrawn and that its objectives be subjected to a genuine, broad-based consultation of our entire society, not the stage-managed, restricted consultation that is currently projected. And I'd welcome your questions.
Thank you, Michael. Do the panelists have questions? Joan, Lainey, or Tom? Joan? You're still on mute, Joan.
Unmute.
There you
Am
go.
I audible?
Perfect.
Okay. Thanks so much. I found your presentation really fascinating. I did want to ask you, because these questions end up being so Montreal-centric so much of the time, whether there are any elements of Bill 96 that you think would have particular impact outside Montreal, notably in the Eastern Townships, but everywhere else outside Montreal, because you have experience there that many of us don't have.
Certainly, Montreal is the engine that drives the Quebec economy, and I find this legislation retrograde in the sense that it very much more represents a parochial, regional point of view that deplores any rapid change and the kind of polyglot social structure that we find in Montreal. In our region, in the Eastern Townships, and I think in most of the regions of Quebec, Anglophones are highly integrated into the society at large. In our schools in the Eastern Townships, we have 45% of the families who speak French at home. That is legacy of the reality that in smaller towns, the language groups mix, they're integrated, and they intermarry. So one or both parents may have a grandparent, may have a great-grandparent who is eligible for English education. And the concern among those people is that their children receive a balanced English-French education. As you can imagine, most of our elementary schools are effectively immersion schools from the outset. Children talk English and French indistinguishably and interchangeably from kindergarten onward, simply because the friend at the next desk or at the lunch table speaks the other language. And so they learn both. And it is a treat to watch them work together, play together, live together, ride the bus together without any kind of linguistic consciousness. So the impact of raising these issues on the rural society that we live in is, for the Anglophones, problematic because it is going to make that kind of integration more difficult. And it's going to make us feel that we're unwanted, unloved, really that the ultimate objective is to drive us away. And as I said, personally, I was educated at the University of Ontario. I came back to Quebec because I think this society has so much more to offer in terms of diversity and variety that that it's where I wanted to live. But if I can't feel that my children and grandchildren will be comfortable living here, then I fear that I'll be a lonely grandparent talking to them on the phone or over Skype while they pursue careers elsewhere in Canada or maybe elsewhere in the world. And that's tragic. That really takes away from the richness that Quebec offers and has offered until now.
Thank you.
Welcome to my club of children, grandchildren living far away. Hopefully it doesn't happen to you too. Eleni.
Thank you very much, Michael. And I know our perspective, as we said, is more Montreal centric, but I have to say, I also have children who have moved away. And one of the reasons they did was exactly because they felt at a certain point in their life, and they're trilingual, by the way, totally fluent in 3 languages, have done education in 3 languages, and are able to work in French. I worked in French, but unfortunately, Mr. Legault does not consider that I am a Quebecer, or that you even, Michael, are a pure laine Quebecer. You may, with all due respect, whether you live in rural Quebec or you live in urban Quebec, the line has been drawn by Mr. Legault and his government to say that there will be discrimination against any English-speaking member of this society, no matter what their contributions, no matter how many generations. And the use of the notwithstanding clause, which is unprecedented, although it's been used in the past, but very limited. But this use of the notwithstanding clause to override the judicial process is totally unacceptable. So it will affect anyone living anywhere in Quebec. I understand that you want to have linguistic peace, but it's Mr. Legault who threw in first the gauntlet. And we do need to raise awareness to Mr. Legault and his government and his MNAs that there are people like you, Michael, who for generations have been integrated, as I feel I have been integrated into Quebec society. And for many, many reasons, he is not listening. So we do need people in the townships and in rural Quebec who have, as you said, integrated well and want linguistic peace. That's what I was hoping for after 2 referendums, by the way, Michael, and I don't see it. So it's more of a comment than it is a question to you, but please keep talking to your neighbors, especially the Francophone neighbors, and tell them that this affects them also. It doesn't only affect the English-speaking community. Their access to education in CEGEP will be limited, and we'll be closing them in a society that doesn't open the world to them. As we know, young people now want to go out into the world, and they can, because they can work from anywhere. So it's more of a comment, Michael, but I thank you for your presentation.
Well, I not only entirely agree with you, but I think we need to begin to stop preaching to the choir, talking to each other about this, and do exactly as you suggest, which is go out in the streets and talk to the neighbors and talk to the other Francophones around us, whose self-interest is evident in this, and particularly for their children and their grandchildren. I speak of grandchildren because they're very much in my consciousness. They're at school age now. I want the very best opportunities for them. I want them to do whatever it is that they would like to do. I don't think I differ in that from any grandparent of any linguistic background. What Legault and company are trying to do is to reforge a society that I think parallels what existed before 1960 in Quebec, which was entirely closed, entirely uniform, and entirely constrained to prevent people from really fulfilling their potential. So if he wants to make a half-century leap backward, then we really need to contest that. And I think Francophones of every stripe politically will contest it as well, because nobody wants to go back to that.
Ledwell.
Thank you, Marcus, and Ms. Murray. Thank you very much for your testimony this morning. There's as I believe you heard Mr. Shannon's testimony talking about global competition and the marketplace, and how there are challenges bringing people from outside the country. In the context of more, say, localized just recruitment, I did have the pleasure of living in the townships for a number of years early in my career. I was an import. Many of the people around me were from the Maritimes, from like I am, or from Ontario, for example, and were early career getting started in the school system there. I also happen to know, say, the Cree School Board, for example, does attract a lot of teachers who are not from the region, which I believe is true for many of the school boards outside of Montreal. In your opinion, how might this bill affect, say, recruitment and retention for some of these teachers who are coming in from the rest of the country, and indeed also internationally, but particularly from other parts of Canada?
Certainly, speaking as chairman of an English school board, it has been not disadvantageous to us to have retained our school boards when the French system abolished them. We have been able to do outreach of a kind that is not being practiced by our counterparts. So the 9 English boards have formed a recruiting program that reaches out to other provinces to look for specialists and look for teachers. And the fact that we offer for example, bilingual New Brunswickers, a bilingual teaching environment and a bilingual learning environment has attracted a few. And it is very much to our benefit in this environment in which the Francophones are suffering an even more severe shortage of employees than we do. Unfortunately, or fortunately, this year, our Human Resources Department was able to report that we opened school with someone in every classroom, an adult in front of every classroom. But for the first time in our recent history, we had to accept some individuals teaching who are not fully qualified and who are still pursuing their accreditation. That's not a desirable situation, but it is in fact far less extreme in our case than it is in the case of our counterparts in the Francophone system who surround us actually at the present time, or whose territory we share.
Just a follow-up question, if I may, on those that are in the classroom and not fully qualified. Is that essentially due to language itself, or is this simply that you have to recruit those before they get to the end of their degrees to fill a gap?
As you know, there's a general shortage of labor everywhere, and we're not immune to that. So we are recruiting people who are pursuing their certification. So in some cases, degree holders who did not graduate in education and who are teaching the subjects in which they hold specialized training, but need to continue their pedagogical training to complete their certification as teachers. And so they are on what are called temporary certificates, a different kind of temporary certificate, and they are given a certain number of years to complete that certification.
Thank you. On a practical level, you touched on professional training, and I'm wondering how Bill 96 may affect the programs that you offer for vocational and professional training, whether you continue to provide classes in English and programs in English, which I guess in the Quebec context makes you a training center for the rest of Canada. Or do you have to change your programs now and offer your programs exclusively in French or mostly in French?
It's a complex situation. You understand that 18-year-olds are not subject to, have not been in the past subject to Bill 101. As adults, they are not constrained by which school board. So we have taught a great many Francophones in the technical sector. Where it becomes problematical is if students leave high school early, between the ages of 16 and 18, and wish to pursue technical training. Then the language law applies to them, and they are not eligible if they come from a Francophone background or a French school board. They're not eligible for technical training in English. This has affected several of our programs. One in particular that I'm familiar with is the professional cooking school, and chefs and graduates of the cooking school are in great demand, have been in strong demand both here and outside the province, but we have had to limit enrollment to students over 18 in order to deal with the language situation as it exists. We are still going to have that context, I believe, if Bill 96 is adopted, but how some of the provisions of that law may be applied certainly are troubling. I touched on also the issue of communication between institutions, where associations of any sort of industrial association, any sort of organization that is technically an institution, must communicate with other institutions like school boards only in French, and that can limit our ability to find stages for work experience for students, and to place them in employment once they graduate.
Do you think it may have an effect on the delivery of the programs in terms of the language of delivery of the programs?
As far as we're concerned, we have not made that interpretation. We feel that we still deliver the program as we do, which generally is bilingually, because the language of work in Quebec is French. And so we ensure that the technical vocabulary of any of our technical programs is fully taught in French. So whether it's welding, where we would presume that the command of French is not a high concern for employers, to things like cooking or healthcare, we do ensure that the French language is, the French vocabulary and command of French is up to the standard for that activity. One of our concerns has been, and this is just an anomaly of the rules as they're applied now, English school boards are required to examine in English. When we wish to examine, for example, a healthcare worker who has taken a bilingual program and whose mother tongue is French, we would like to have the liberty to examine in French rather than in English. We're not able to do so right at the present time. And so flexibility in education is and should be critical, so that we can give the graduates of our programs, the students, the best possible preparation and the most complete exposure to the kind of work environment that they will have eventually. The rules and the narrow bureaucratic interpretation of those rules are a real barrier to the benefit of nobody in particular.
I don't know if you had a chance to hear Robert Libman this morning. He was our first speaker. And it's not a question, I guess I'm just raising it as something to think about. But he raised the notion of the inclusion of the term, the Quebec nation, Quebec as a nation, potentially having an impact on the Section 23 status of English school boards and minority language education. Is that something that that you or QESBA has had a chance to consider?
As you know, Marcus, we're actively contesting Bill 40, which was the act to abolish school boards. And we are awaiting judgment at the Quebec Superior Court level at the present time. We are certainly not anticipating another court battle to contest the issue of nationhood, but the impact on Section 133 is something that we would have to take very seriously if in fact the interpretation includes affecting our ability to function in a second language or in a minority language.
Thank you, Mike. Are there any other questions? If not, Mr. Murray, thank you. Go back and enjoy your grandchildren. I envy you a great deal on that. And regards to you and to your colleagues across the system, the English system.
Thank you, Marcus, and thank you to the Quebec English Community Groups Association for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you. Notre prochain présentateur est aussi une fière townshipper qui, même lorsqu'il était l'animateur de Daybreak à CBC, vivait à Hatley. Royal Orr is a community leader who has devoted his career to promoting Quebec's English-speaking community and to building bridges with the majority community. Good morning, Royal, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Marcus. I guess I'd start by congratulating the QCGN for this initiative and, more importantly, thanking you volunteers for taking this on. This is a huge investment that you've committed to, and so it's much appreciated by those of us watching this. I guess I'll probably just read this into the record in terms of the presentation that I had. It is a relatively brief, and then I'd be happy to take whatever questions you have, if that's okay with you, Marcus.
Absolutely.
Thank you. This is how it's supposed to go in modern democratic Quebec. The government of the day passes legislation that's seen as unjust in the eyes of a group of citizens. They believe that the new law does not respect their basic rights and freedoms as protected by the Charte des droits et libertés de la personne. They organize, raise money, write legal briefs, and take the government to court. And if their legal case is strong, they win. First at Quebec Superior Court, and then, if necessary, at the Court of Appeal, with Quebec judges agreeing that they have been discriminated against, that their basic democratic freedom has been compromised, and that the government has failed to make its case that undermining these citizens' rights is justified by the social and political situation. The Quebec government appeals the decision, as is its right, to the Supreme Court of Canada, where, at least in the case that I was most directly involved in with commercial signs and Bill 101, where the judges again decide for the citizens, confirming that commercial speech is indeed protected by the Charte québécoise, by both Article 3 as a basic freedom and Article 10 as a potential site of discrimination. The government back in 1988 chose, of course, to invoke notwithstanding clauses to set aside these decisions. Then Premier Robert Bourassa claimed that social peace was threatened, and he decided to not respect freedom of speech and to maintain French-only exterior signs. He paid a heavy political price, resignation of most of the English-speaking members of his cabinet, and ultimately the loss of the Meech Lake deal and the Charlottetown Accord referendum that would have brought Quebec formally into the Canadian Constitution. His Minister for the Protection of the French Language, Claude Ryan, eventually found a way to implement the decision of the Supreme Court before the notwithstanding clause had to be renewed. He advanced the same reasonable, just solution based on the Quebec Charter that the citizens who went to court had always championed. It created language peace, as we've referred to it, for 3 decades. That's how it's supposed to go. But now we have a government in Quebec that can't be bothered with the Charte or the normal democratic processes of justice seeking and human rights protection that should characterize a modern democratic society. This government has chosen to ignore how our democracy has operated since the 1976 unanimous adoption of the Charte des droits et libertés de la personne by the National Assembly. With both Bill 21 and 96, the Legault government has turned its back on our deep, proud traditions of human rights promotion and protection. The Quebec Charter was arguably a crowning jewel of the Quiet Revolution. Our greatest legal minds of that era, Jacques-Yvan Morin, Frank Scott, Paul-André Crépeau, along with successive Liberal and Parti Québécois governments, crafted, adopted, strengthened, and implemented a human rights charter that was recognized as one of the most innovative, comprehensive, and progressive in the world. Premier René Lévesque was so proud of the strengthened 1983 version of the charter that he mailed a copy to every household in Quebec. I remember getting mine at home. But the CAQ's ethno-nationalist agenda, as reflected in Bills 21 and 96, has cast a powerful light on the vulnerabilities of the Quebec Charter, vulnerabilities that have been recognized and deplored since its adoption in 1976. First, and most obviously, the Quebec Charter is too easily altered by a simple majority in the National Assembly. In a multi-party parliamentary system like ours, a government with a shockingly small percentage of the popular vote can change our human rights charter too easily. As Jacques-Yvan Morin eloquently and repeatedly demanded, the Charte des droits et libertés de la personne should be protected by a requirement of a supermajority in the National Assembly or a referendum to adopt any changes. Second, all political parties must renew their engagement with the Quebec Charter and commit to promoting its recognition as the fundamental law of Quebec and its generous application to promote non-discrimination, freedom, and justice in our society. The Quebec Bar and all Quebec judges should redouble efforts to ensure that the Charter has pride of place in proceedings and judgment. The Quebec Charter's standing has always been quasi-constitutional, as lawyers refer to it. Now it's time to give it full constitutional status and put it out of reach of alteration by a simple majority of the National Assembly. The predominance of the Charter, the Quebec Charter, over all other Quebec laws should be enshrined as well. Third, the preemptive use of the notwithstanding clause in the Charter must be denounced for what it is, undemocratic and disrespectful behavior by any modern government, especially here in Quebec with our laudable record of human rights development and protection. Ideally, preemptive use of the notwithstanding clause should be disallowed, only coming into play if and when a law has been contested in a court of law with all its guarantees of open, reasonable, evidence-based review and judgment. And fourth, citizens who are concerned about human rights protection and non-discrimination in Quebec need to rally to the cause, supporting human rights organizations and agencies, demanding clear support for human rights from all politicians and political parties, and giving moral and financial support to charter-based court challenges, including the full range of social and economic rights that the Quebec Charter identifies and protects. This should include strong criticism of media and commentators who promote and exploit narrow, ethno-nationalist and discriminatory opinions and policies. Bill 96 is unacceptable, disrespectful, and unjust in several ways. But its biggest sins are its complete disrespect for Quebec's profound traditions of democratic development as enshrined in the Charte des droits et libertés de la personne, and its enmity towards the power the Charte gives to seek justice in the face of discriminatory government action or majority indifference to minority rights and freedoms. Bill 96 preemptive invoking of notwithstanding clauses must not stand. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Royal. You can always count on you to be fairly direct about your opinion, and it's much appreciated. Are there some questions from the panelists? John?
Yeah, that was very powerful stuff, Royal. But I find myself wondering, I have no argument at all with your arguments about notwithstanding and the primacy of human rights. But I'm just find myself wondering if you have managed to assess the implications of the practical details in the bill, the rules about communication between institutions, about access to English schools, about all that picky stuff. And while we're at it, what about the establishment of what are we getting? A minister of the French language, and a French language commissioner, enhanced powers for the Office de la Langue Française. So I guess what I'm saying is, beyond the really profound question of principle that you raise, what do you think about the inner workings of the bill?
Well, John, I haven't spent a lot of time looking at or thinking about the picky stuff, as you call it.
All right.
Except to say, I guess, that we know from our entire lives here in Quebec that the issue of the future of the French language and the extent to which its promotion is to be undertaken by the government is always going to be with us. Certainly for our lifetimes, our children's lifetimes, and even our grandkids' lifetimes, as Michael Murray has put on the table so eloquently. It's just always going to be there. And for me, the major thing we have to be focused on, or one of the major things we have to be focused on right now, is what's the legal foundation upon which we're going to fight through these things and struggle through these things. Because if we have the foundation blocks in place, okay, governments will come, governments will go, crises will arise and crises will abate, some of them manufactured, some of them real. And we will be in these kinds of psychodramas on a reasonably regular basis. But we've got to get the foundation set. And that's what concerns me most about this initiative and Bill 21, frankly, which is that this government has such contempt for those foundational stones, which I think need to be in place. And I think it's particularly short-sighted on the part of this government because the reality, the demographic reality of Quebec means that we will continue to be an increasingly diverse place. These issues of who belongs and who doesn't belong, who's in and who's out that Eleni was talking about before are going to also be there. And if anything, they're going to be sharpened by the demographic trends that we see at work. So right now, yes, the picky stuff has to be looked at. And I know you've got lots of people who've been looking at it. But I think that all of us as citizens have to really, Francophone and Anglophone, have to really focus on what's going to be the foundation that we're going to build the future on. There are stones that are in there, but they're not as robustly implanted as they should be. And this is my big concern right now, which is those have to be put in place and made as solid as possible, including their constitutional recognition, because we all know that we've got a hangover that dates from 1982, and somehow Quebec's status has to be regularized within the Constitution. And that's the other thing this Bill 96 shows, which is that governments of Quebec are going to start trying to find ways to constitutionalize things with or without the permission or the partnership with the rest of Canada. So our community, I think, has to become very engaged with what is Quebec going to be in the future and how will it be constitutionally recognized.
Thanks.
Tom Ledwell.
Thanks very much, Marcus. And thank you, Royal, for your presentation. It's you paint wonderful pictures of not just what's happening right now, but also what has happened over time. And it is your rich knowledge of the history of this question that I'm interested in hearing more about. You use the expression language peace, and how there was a moment 30 or so odd years ago when there was a high watermark. That involved the courts, involved the political realm, and so on. But this idea of kind of language peace, it seems implied that this is another high watermark. This is a disruptive moment, and so I'm interested in you characterizing this moment compared to some of these similar debates in the past, and is this and what this does represent in terms of just in terms of an important moment or one perhaps that moves us in a new direction.
Well, it's an interesting question, Tom. I'm not sure I'm able to answer it very effectively, except to say that clearly that truce, if you want to call it that, or language peace that Mr. Ryan managed to put in place, it was basically Mr. Ryan, Claude Ryan, who was able to pull that together based, as I said, on what both the Quebec courts and the Supreme Court, based on the Canadian and Quebec charters, had said was the reasonable solution to the commercial signs issue. That did hold for a long time. In this particular case, we're not going back into that whole realm of commercial signs, but it's pretty clear that we've got a government which is pushing very hard to look tough on this, to come up with new ways of doing things. but ways that I think are kind of like tired and frankly not particularly effective in terms of supporting and promoting the French language. I mean, you know, preventing people from going to cégep in English, just like, is this really going to reinforce the French language in a way that's effective? I don't think so. But I think the more dangerous thing of what we're in now is this government's, as I have said now a couple of times, is this government's contempt for the rights of citizens to contest the decisions that government make based on human rights charters. That to me is what represents almost like the most severe crisis. As I said to Joan, I mean, these things come, these things go, but the real question for me is, you know, what powers, what rights, what systems are available to citizens to contest these things and push them in the direction of resolution. With the case of the notwithstanding clause, obviously, you know, the notion of the notwithstanding clause, which some people deplore, some people say shouldn't be there at all, but the notion is that you're in a political system where decisions are made, decisions are contested, victories are held, human rights are you know, the courts attempt to force the respect of human rights, but a government chooses not to for a set period of time. But the politics continues, right? You can still go and contest it at the UN, as was the case with commercial science. You continue to organize, you continue to militate for some kind of resolution that you think is just, and eventually the pressure mounts to a point where the government doesn't want to face going through, you know, the psychodrama of imposing the notwithstanding clause again. So I guess what I would say is, yes, this feels like one of those moments, but I think that for us as a community, we have to recognize sometimes, often, it's not enough simply to go to court and win, that these are politicized processes by their nature, and that we have to stay engaged. And that, as I said in my brief, one of the things we have to do is to develop a deep, powerful charter culture within our community and within the wider society, so that when these things happen, we have the fundamental resource that we need, which is an appeal to human rights charters of various kinds.
Thank you, Royal. And what can I say about having been there from 1980, as you have and others have? It's kind of, to be honest, it's the first time in a long, long time that I've wondered if we have any allies at all. In the past, I think we did have allies. You spoke about Claude Ryan, you spoke even about Robert Bourassa, who I worked with, I think was more reasonable. But we're dealing with a government, both on the provincial level and the federal level, that in fact believes in political expediency for votes, and does not, if you look at the recent changes, even that the federal government has proposed, mind you, it's still a draft, to be fair to the minister and also the prime minister, it is a draft. But I see no road in terms of using, for example, the court system, when the notwithstanding clause will be the biggest barrier that has to be surpassed. And if we have the recent example of Bill 21, and how the judge himself said that it was unconstitutional, but he would not say that the law doesn't stand. So I think we'll face the same situation going through the court systems with Bill 96 as with Bill 21. I don't know if Bill 21 will go further. Hopefully people will take it to the Supreme Court of Canada. Or even the UN, like you said. But we're in for a long battle with a government that is deaf, honestly, deaf to the rights of minorities. Perhaps I'm being too doomsday royal, but I am here for the fight, just like you are. But the court system itself has been compromised exactly because of that notwithstanding clause that was available to Mr. Legault to override all laws, practically all rights.
Well, Eleni, you know, your points are all very well taken, especially the point that this is going to be a long haul battle. I mean, that's just the way it is with human rights, right? That's the way it goes. And with respect to that Bill 21 judgment, that judgment is still there, right? You're right that the judge was powerless, or that court, or all courts are going to be powerless to sort of overturn Bill 21, but they can still say it, right? And that has impact. That's useful politically, to be able to say, even though a preemptive use of the notwithstanding clause was there in the legislation, a judge who looked at it objectively with all of the kinds of rules that to ensure that the hearing is evidence-based and that the hearing is not simply subject to political whim and emotions, that judge said unquestionably this is discriminatory. Now that has to be picked up by citizens and pushed further to the next level of the courts, yes, where we're going to get something similar, but those judgments still stand, right? The fact that, you know, Robert Bourassa slapped us with the notwithstanding clause back in 1989 and 1988, just on the verge of 1989, doesn't mean that that judgment didn't stand. Doesn't mean that that was one of the major things that was in Claude Ryan's mind when he was so desperately looking for a solution. Doesn't mean when we went to the United Nations, or the citizens who went to the United Nations to contest this further weren't able to put on the table, hey, look, Canadian courts, Quebec courts say that this is unjust. So, okay, so, you know, we've got a system, not just in Quebec, but in Canada, where we have these notwithstanding clauses. But let's just recognize that that means we have to be even more engaged politically, that we have to push harder, we have to fight longer. The struggle is going to be never ending in the face of governments that choose to slap preemptive notwithstanding clauses on things. But allies, look, there's a lot of Quebecers who believe in human rights. There are a lot of Quebecers who value the Charter, the Quebec Charter in particular, especially with its wide recognition of social and economic rights, and not just the political rights that are obviously critical as well. You can find them in all parties, you can find them everywhere. Appealing to them, talking to them, connecting with them, engaging with them, getting their support ain't going to be easy, but that's where we're in now. Unfortunately, we have this neat, you know, this ethno-nationalist government in power right now. In spite of the fact that he's riding so high, Mr. Legault won't be there forever. The CAC will not be in charge forever. Who knows who it will be? But in every party, in every sector of this society, there are Quebecers who believe in human rights, want to ensure that the society is based on a strong recognition of human rights, and who have to be put together as a political force over and over and over again.
Thank you. And I know there are voices, but they've got to be a little louder as far as the politicians goes, but that's my last comment.
If I might say though, Eleni, on this point, and this is something I think the English speaking community has to take really to heart, which is you can't just rely on judges and the Canadian Charter, right? Like we are Quebecers. We got to sort this thing out as Quebecers. We have to engage in it. We have to do it in French. We have to use the resources that we have, particularly the Quebec, you know, Quebec traditions of human rights protection, especially the Charter, the Quebec Charter. And we can't sort of have this short circuit Deus ex machina solution of judges making a decision based on the Canadian Charter.
Thank you, Royal.
Just a couple of things from me. You mentioned this is a fight for society, for the Quebec society, but there's a big chunk of the Quebec society that doesn't see this as a problem. Now, how do we move that into the front of their mind and saying, look, this affects everybody in Quebec?
Well, I mean, first of all, there have been voices. I agree with Eleni. They're few and far between and not nearly as loud as one would like to hear as an English-speaking Quebecer, or just as a Quebecer concerned about human rights and respect for the Charter. People like Andre Pratt. I mean, you know, we could go through that short but powerful list of voices, or list of powerful voices that have this perspective. You know, for Quebecers more generally, I think it's just engaging in that conversation about what kind of society do we want? What kind of protections of the individual rights of Quebecers do we want? Some of the polling QCGN itself has done has showed that depending on how you slice the issue or how you present the issue, Quebecers do respond, Francophone Quebecers, in very high numbers about concerns about human rights and wanting to ensure that there's respect for human rights. Now, you know, when it gets sliced as protection of the French language, which is under threat, And that drum is beaten by, frankly, the Quebec core empire on a daily basis, increasingly loudly. Well, maybe human rights isn't in the forefront of people's thinking, and instead they think this is all about protection of the French language. But that's not the only voice, even though they're extremely powerful voices. And the depth of Quebecers' commitment, Francophone, Anglophone, Allophone, First Nation, the depth of Quebecers' commitment to fundamental rights, respectful recognition of minorities, and so on and so forth, is very high. So it's, you know, those basic political challenges of identifying issues, cutting those issues in a certain way, presenting them in a certain way, and then building the coalitions that allow you to sort of say to the government of the day, we're not going to allow you to chip away and disrespect the Charte québécoise des droits et libertés de la personne in the way that you have been doing. Thank you.
Uplifting may not be the right term, but it certainly is eye-opening. You know?
But Marcus, I don't want to sound Pollyanna-ish about this. This is going to be hard work. I mean, I will just ask the question for the folks who happen to be listening. We've watched several important groups battling through Bill 21, right? How many people have gone out there on the internet and made a donation to one of the organizations leading that struggle? What percentage of our community, which now is so concerned because our ox is being gored by a notwithstanding clause in Bill 96, what percentage of our community actually took the trouble to support the people battling Bill 21? I would suggest less than 1%. It should be like something more like 20%. They should be rolling in cash from English-speaking Quebecers concerned about this thing.
Yeah, I think you're right. We don't only have to motivate the French side, but we have to move the English side as well to mobilize.
Well, and put your money where your mouth is. You know, there's some communities within the English-speaking Quebec who understand this. You've got to invest in what's important, right? I take my hat off to the Jewish community, the Armenian community. Somehow they've kind of understood that if it's important, you got to put money into it. You got to figure out a way to support it in a way which is very clear and very helpful. And so, as I say, you know, getting engaged on this one is also going to be getting people engaged to create that charter culture and to show their support for that charter culture by investing in the people who are prepared to battle this.
Thank you, Roy. Important and much appreciated presentation.
Thank you. My pleasure. Once again, thank you all for all of your engagement on this one. I really respect how much time you're devoting to this. Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you. Next presenter is Natasha Luttrell. Natasha is the only person presenting today that I've never met. She will be speaking today on an issue that I'm sure most of us have not considered, at least not until now: the impact of Bill 96 on the hearing and visually impaired communities. Welcome, Natasha, and the floor is yours. Welcome.
Is there an interpreter?
Yes.
I don't see an interpreter. Just a second. Oh, hi. Okay, very good. Okay, so I'm just gonna, I have no idea what I'm doing. Excellent. Everyone stay tuned. I have no idea what I'm doing. Okay. All right, so I'm going to read from a brief, and then I see an interpreter. So anything that you say will be interpreted back to me. Okay, excellent. Okay. So good afternoon. So first, I would like to take the opportunity to thank the QCGN for its initiative to hold these hearings and the invitation to highlight concerns as this bill applies to Quebec's deaf community. Please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Natasha. I have lived in Montreal, Quebec since 2002. Unlike many members of the deaf community, I was born and grew up with normal hearing. In my late 20s, I suddenly became deaf as a complication of a connective tissue disorder. So I have a strong foundation in English, my native language, and then American Sign Language, which I learned later in life. So ASL is the most widely signed language used throughout Canada within our deaf communities. Quebec and other French-speaking areas throughout Canada tend to use la langue des signes québécois. We also have Indigenous signed languages. The overlap between the two more common languages, ASL and LSQ, is roughly 40%. Despite common belief, they are not the same language. Sign language is neither a universal language, nor is it a codified system of English and French. Signed languages have grammar and syntactical systems of their own. Deaf individuals in Quebec often have to parse between 4 distinct languages: English, French, ASL, and LSQ. Bill 96 highlights some potential implications within our community. So first, if LSQ is the signed language of Quebec, cited as a primary language of deaf persons in Canada, as per the Accessible Canada Act, then we might reasonably consider that Bill 96 excludes the LSQ using deaf community in terms of its linguistic and cultural identity. The Convention on the Rights for Persons with Disabilities tackles language in Article 2, recognizing that signed languages are equal and equivalent to spoken languages. The UN CRPD was ratified by Canada in 2010, and the optional protocol was signed in 2018. So this is a language matter that has never been rectified by the province of Quebec, but falls within the purview of human rights as it pertains to the deaf community. It has insidious effects on language deprivation, services offered, educational quality, and even how the Quebec Human Rights Commission approaches complaints when deaf individuals have been denied reasonable accommodation. So given that discussions surrounding Bill 96 have largely taken place without the presence of sign language interpreters or consultation with the deaf community, one could reasonably argue that the bill is not well formulated as it applies to LSQ users within Quebec. From a human rights perspective, the deaf community should be involved, and LSQ should be considered an official language of Quebec. Second, discrimination based on disability, which would be deafness, is prohibited in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Since the Charter of French language prohibits or limits the use of other languages in other places, and Bill 96 ultimately seeks to strengthen French, you will see that this too leaves potential oversight of the deaf community. Deaf individuals may be denied interpreting, the opportunity to work, and forced to conform to a spoken language to which they have had limited exposure without the appropriate human rights safeguards. A well-known Supreme Court decision within the deaf community is the Eldridge decision, which states that sign language interpreters must be made available in the provision of health care for deaf individuals to maintain equal and effective communication. So personally, I have been denied sign language interpreting many times within the medical context, all incidents filed with the Quebec Human Rights Commission. Even after citing the Eldridge decision, which also applies to Quebec, my complaints were closed with the CDPDG stating, "We consider that there is no reason to believe that the hospital centers refuse to accommodate you in regards to your needs." So the CDPDG considers that so long as someone does not deny me physical access to the hospital as a result of being deaf, then no discrimination has occurred based on disability, despite the intersection of language, communication, and my understanding as it extends to the deaf community. So as a result, my medical records are inaccurate. I have been placed in solitary solitary locked rooms, and forcibly sedated, ultimately with no recourse, considering language or disability. I am particularly sensitive to and alarmed with the notwithstanding clause being evoked in this bill, given the already problematic interpretation of Quebec's charter as it applies to the deaf community. So from my perspective as an ASL user, I question how Bill 96 will go on to affect our services. We are a minority within a minority and find ourselves with a shortage of qualified interpreters and an inefficient system to book and dispatch them. You might notice that when pandemic briefings are given by the provincial government, the sign language interpreter is often not present when officials and media switch to English. Access to French classes is exceedingly difficult to obtain as a deaf person, given our unique needs. I once took a French class that was conducted in 4 different languages at the same time, once per week to meet the demand. And all students were at various levels in their respective signed and spoken languages. So as a deaf individual in Quebec, I have to wonder if any of these factors have been taken into consideration with Bill 96. They have enormous implications for our human and language rights, cultural identity, and self-determination. I would ask that they be further scrutinized in an accessible forum that includes both provincial and national deaf organizations whose mandates are to protect ASL and LSQ using individuals. Invoking Section 33 without consideration of Quebec's deaf community and its cultural and linguistic background would be a large oversight and fundamentally audist in nature. Additionally, since Quebec receives money from the federal government, I question if a more extensive analysis of Bill 96 is required within the parameter of the deaf community, the Accessible Canada Act, and the UN CRPD, and Section 15 of the Canadian Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for your presentation. Are there questions? Joan Fraser.
Of course. Thank you very much for your presentation. It is a perspective that I fear most of us had not previously considered. I wanted to ask, have you or organizations representing the deaf community had any contact with the minister in charge of Bill 96, Simon Jolin Barrette, to put your case to him? If so, what was the response? If not, would you consider doing so? Because hearing from you directly can have an impact that no representative body like the QCGN could ever have.
So I have contacted the Quebec government personally and received no response. I have sent the issue for analysis to the Canadian Association of the Deaf, and apparently it's a conflictual issue within the deaf community because it's a provincial issue, but it's also a national issue. So there's a little bit of it's not an issue that was brought to our attention until recently. I identified the issue as a potential issue, but it isn't getting much attention from deaf organizations. We're still in the process of getting organizations aware of the issue. It's gone. It's let's say it's an oversight on behalf of the Quebec government, but additionally, the deaf community has also had an oversight in this area as well. But yes, I have contacted the Quebec government and I have received no response.
If I could have a follow-up question, Marcus?
Of course.
What protections exist in Quebec law now for people with disabilities and notably deaf people? What, other than the Quebec Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms, what other provincial law can you turn to for protection?
I am unable to answer that question. I can tell you that deaf organizations have come to the province of Quebec in the past and tried to get LSQ recognized as an official language, but have been unsuccessful.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for being here.
My pleasure.
And then Korakakis.
Thank you so much, Natasha, for informing us about an issue and for your personal story, also some of the challenges that you have faced. Bill 96 touches, what you brought to light was that Bill 96 touches many subgroups that may not be obvious in terms of when the government drafted this legislation. So it's very important that your voice and the voice of others who are have challenges is heard. I have one suggestion more than a question. I don't know who your M&A is or what riding you're living in, but that's easy to find out. You may know. I don't know if you've made any attempts to enlighten the M&A on the challenges that you have faced. I also believe if you could draft a letter and send it to all the political leaders in the National Assembly, that your voice will not go unheard. I truly believe that. I'm sorry and I won't take responsibility for that, but I think it's abhorrent that you didn't receive an answer from the government or the minister involved. But you should try, if you do have already that letter, you may want to send it, and you can do it by email. Obviously, you don't even have to talk to people to make sure that they know that your letter has gone unanswered to all the other party leaders and even other M&As. So I recommend that you do that because it's an important issue you raise, and one that I'm sure the majority of the people sitting in the National Assembly have no idea that it touches you directly or the community that you represent. So thank you very much. I don't know if you've tried to reach, but I'd be happy to help you on that, by the way, or the QCGN will be happy to help you in terms of making sure that at least your National Assembly representative is brought to date on the implications of Bill 96 to your community.
Thank you for that.
Your comments, your presentation has provoked quite a number of comments on our chat. One of the issues that's been brought up is, have you made an approach, or are you able to make an approach concerning the deaf community to the French media? This is certainly an issue that would be of great interest to the French community.
Is it possible for me to toggle over to the chat to see the questions? Yeah, it's possible. Just a second.
I'm not sure how it's set up, but some of the input, I'm sure that QCGN can find a way to forward you the comments that have come in with your presentation.
Okay. Okay.
But I think the comment was that this is an issue that should be taken as well to Francophone media, not in addition to the politicians, because the politicians read the papers.
Yes.
Thomas Ledwell.
Natasha, let me add my voice just to say thanks for your incredibly compelling testimony. It's obviously something that is so integral to your life and that touches so dramatically the lives of of other deaf people in the province. My question first is that we have passed language legislation. You noted that there have been attempts to have LSQ recognized, that has been a slow road, if you will. But looking at even just the interpretation of some of this language legislation, even just through the lens of LSQ, are there rules, are there interpretations? Is there a starting point for you as you look at this law and how ASL and LSQ may be approached?
Okay, so obviously I have strong opinions. I don't use LSQ, I use ASL, but my personal opinion, which is not very well elocuted, is that if French will be strengthened in Quebec, then they must strengthen LSQ as well. French and LSQ are equal. So it is not appropriate to accept French as an official language without accepting LSQ as an official language. The logic of that fails me. So if we have the UN CRPD saying signed language is equal to spoken language, I don't understand why we have only one official language in Quebec. LSQ is a language. It's used by Quebec's deaf community. So therefore, it is equal and must be recognized as an official language of Quebec. That's just so utterly clear to me that I don't even know what to do with myself. Now, as an ASL user, I mean, I understand that it is used less in Quebec. But I mean, it goes back to the Official Language Act, which I'm not even going to pretend I know a lot about. But the Official Language Act is something that the deaf community is looking to reform. And we are looking to put American Sign Language and Langue de Québécois into the Official Languages Act. Right now, the stopgap is the Accessible Canada Act. And it's section, bear with me, please. It's 5.1 subsection 2, and it's cited as a primary language of deaf persons. It's not an official language, it's a primary language. So we would have to go on to reform the Official Language Act to make it an official language. That hasn't been done yet. That's all I know. Does that answer your question?
Very much. Marcus, may I ask a follow-up question as well?
Go ahead.
With several other participants, we've asked about counterparts in the French language, someone working with English school boards and working with counterparts across schooling systems and so on. Can you enlighten us to the relationship between the ASL community, the LSQ community, and how much meeting there is between the members of each community? Is it a very bilingual community? Personally, this is a community I don't know incredibly well, and I'd be interested to know if there could be a united front between ASL and LSQ speakers on regarding this particular point.
Okay, unfortunately, I am unable to answer that question. I can only tell you that LSQ is also used throughout Canada in French-speaking areas such as Ottawa. I'm not able to give you numbers. And I can tell you that there would probably be a united front in terms of approaching Bill 96, because signed language users are usually like we're people of the eye. So you've met a deaf person, you're best friends with a deaf person, right? It's a common thing, despite the difference in language. The issue really is that the deaf community is not aware of the potential implications of this bill.
Thank you very much.
At this point, I want to say thank you to Natasha, and for a very important, and in spite of what you say, a very eloquent presentation that has brought to light an issue that we hadn't been looking at up to now. But thank you for your presentation.
Well, thank you for having me.
Pleasure. This brings to a close today's hearings. For me, it clarified that we have at least two paths to follow, and we need to follow them simultaneously. We need to continue the strong opposition to the creation of a charter-free zone. And secondly, we need to try to secure changes to specific elements of the bill. Our friends in education, for example, have made it clear that changing the rules governing temporary permits make no sense. It will make it more difficult to attract talent to Quebec. It'll make it more difficult to attract investment in Quebec. And this is at a time when there is tremendous global competition for people and for expansion of population. Our hearings will continue tomorrow, when once again we have an impressive lineup, including the Dean of McGill Law School, Natasha, and our friends from Western Quebec. Thank you once again to our presenters, to my fellow panelists. I appreciate all of your input, to QCGN, to Avenue Communications, and of course to all of you who have joined us online. Have a great day and à demain.